All right, we will reconvene from the August 8th meeting for our work session, well, actually our continued meeting, transportation planning and other items. Board members ready to proceed?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to talk.
Do we have to talk so you can tell if the audio's back?
On this, and I think we're back.
Are we back?
Yeah, we're back. Sorry about that.
We think we're back.
You
All right.
are. You're online and everything.
We will start all over. We've reconvened. Mr. Seeley had a question about the agenda. Repeat your question, Mr. Seeley.
I said I am very uncomfortable. This was supposed to be a transportation meeting only, which was in the motion that I made to actually reconvene this, to actually move this meeting. And then we've got reading a proposed text amendment, reading of another proposed comprehensive plan amendment, consent agenda items that may or may not be related to transportation. And I think this should just be a transportation planning discussion, because that's what this meeting was actually adjourned to.
Okay, and as we were saying before the sound went out, agenda item 4A is without a doubt transportation.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Cully, would you like to come and address the agenda? At least 4B is your request for the RFP for reassessment. And then if you'd like, you can address staff's desire or
4B, this is a year we need to go into a reassessment. And so I was trying to just let you know we were going to put an RFP out to hire a reassessment firm. If we wait 2 weeks, it just backs us up 2 weeks. We like to get them on board so they can start before the first of the year, because next year in 24 is when that work has got to be done for the assessment to take effect January 1 of 25. I don't have to have it. I mean, you can nod and say, I mean, you could say you don't care. We're going to bring back the contract, you know, as far as who we rank. There's not many of those firms even left doing reassessment, believe it or not. It's a very limited pool of reassessment firms, but that's all. We want to get that RFP on the street.
is that all right with the board?
Yeah, that's basically a point of information. It's not anything we have to vote on.
Well, it is an authorization.
Until he brings the to send out the letters, to send out but not to bring us back a contract. That we would have to vote on. But
We would have to vote on an authorization to issue the RFP also.
right. Well, I'm going to also state that I was surprised, and staff knows that I went back and even looked at the film, and the motion was to recess to a planning workshop. And so I was surprised to see other things on the agenda that we were not aware was happening. Therefore, I assume the public was not aware of happening. Mr. Cully did state before in his closing statements that there might be, he had a couple of things, housekeeping things that he might bring back, which I assumed were these two consent agenda things. But I think I do also feel a little uncomfortable because we don't have legal here with us tonight because we thought it was just going to be a work session. And I just want that on the record that
All
I
right.
feel much better knowing we were moving
That's
right.
fine. Before I yield to Mr. Underwood, agenda items 2 and 3 are on this agenda basically at my desire, because when we were making the August 8th agenda, it became fairly long, and I thought we should push a couple of things off till this meeting. So I'd asked staff at that time to put those 2 on. Those 2 items pertain to the Amazon project, which is in the northern part of the county, and I don't know if we want to slow that up. It's only that particular project, has nothing to do with anything else. So if that's an
Mr. Thomas.
issue or concern, it's my fault. I was going to give Mr. Underwood, and then I'll go to you. Mr. Underwood?
Mr. Chairman, I don't see anything wrong with it. Those items being on agenda on a normal, under normal circumstances. But we did, from my perspective, and I didn't look at the agenda last night because I thought we were only discussing transportation. And that may be my error, but I received a letter from a person, not one of my constituents. I think it's a constituent of Mrs. Long, whose comments I didn't appreciate, but I can certainly understand that everything that we do, we should do in transparency. If we say we're going to do X and that's the impression that we give, that's what we should do. I don't bow or kowtow to people's negative comments because they only agree when things are go their way, and that doesn't faze me. I'm going to do what's right for the county. But in this instance, I do believe that in principle, we are a little bit out of order because we didn't give people who may have wanted to come and have comment based on our last meeting, probably were thinking the same thing that I was thinking, that this would only be a transportation discussion, and I think anything else. So I think items 1 and 4 are okay. I think we can wait even to make the on the consent agenda for September 12th, regarding the assessment. I think that can wait till September 12th. I don't see any sense of urgency. We're going to hire them. We're going to ask them to do their job, do it effectively, and make sure that we have it completed within the time frame. So I'm in favor of addressing items 1, which is discussion of transportation, planning, and consent agenda item number 4A, which is related to VDOT and Dry Bridge Road, because that's part of VDOT, and that's what we came to discuss. So that's my comment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Ms. Forehand?
I concur with Mr. Underwood. The last couple of days, the comprehensive plan has been discussed, and the Jericho Road PERTS has been conflated with the information that we're discussing tonight, or that's on the agenda for tonight. And I don't know, just didn't sit well with a lot of folks. It didn't sit well with
Is that well with me?
our intent to be very transparent and with, letting everybody know what's coming in advance. And so I would concur that I would like 1 and 4 on the agenda, and I'm comfortable with moving 2 and 3, even though it pushes us back into September for those items. But I'm comfortable with that. So,
All right, Mr. Wilson, is this going to cause us a problem with that particular project? And Mr. Forehand, you did say this was just the Amazon project, not Jericho Road, these 2.
correct.
Okay.
What this is regarding the Stonewall Jackson Road.
Yes.
It has been conflated with the comprehensive plan in general
I understand what you're saying now.
regarding
Yes.
Jericho Road. And there are some hurt feelings about that, even though that's not what it is. But anyway, it's that is what it is. at this
Understand.
point.
Mr. Wilson?
It does not kill the project, it delays it. And anything that delays our momentum is something I'd like to try to avoid. The PERT itself is generic. It's a zoning category. It would apply anywhere that somebody wants to do this kind of project. It's not designated specifically for Jericho Road or anywhere else. It's meant to be used to attract
Generically.
businesses.
Okay.
Was just get curious, was this,
Go ahead,
Wilson,
Mr. Black.
was this not ready for the last board meeting?
It was ready.
It was ready? So the delay, I mean, we've been delayed for, I think the first meeting on the project, that the big project was 2 years ago. So I have a hard time believing that on our end that we're going to delay something a whole heck of a lot.
I understand exactly what you mean. We actually were having these conversations in 2018.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the way these businesses work, their perception of time is different from ours. Theirs can go very long, and once we have the ball, there's no time at all as far as they're concerned.
Right, yeah.
I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying, but it's not a killer.
Right, okay, thank you.
I'm going to Mr. Underwood. You had a question?
No.
Oh, that wasn't you? Okay, Mr. Sealy.
Has the planning commission seen number 2 and number 3 yet? Have they voted on them?
Yeah, those two items were approved by the planning commission
Okay,
and
great.
ready.
They're-
Well, wait, let me explain to you. They were on the August 8th agenda.
No, let me finish the rest of my statement,
Go ahead.
because we have no minutes from the planning commission that articulates what was even said about these, and it's here tonight for the first reading with nothing from the planning commission. I got to tell you that bothers me a lot. We spend a lot of time at the planning commission doing these kinds of things, and for us to not have the advantage of being able to read that information bothers me tremendously. And in our packet, there's nothing that says it's been to planning. It's a couple of sheets about what this is. So that ought to bother all of us sitting up here about information and it being our first reading with everything not being provided.
It does, and I think Mr. Cully has expressed that same problem with getting minutes for the regular board meetings, and he's trying to address that. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I appreciate it. All right, we will take a motion to fix the agenda, if you would.
I'll make a motion that we remove item number 2, number 3, and we can go ahead, I guess, with everybody's consent on 4A.
You want to remove 4B also?
Correct.
Okay.
Second.
There's a motion made by Mr. Sealy, seconded by Mrs. Long to strike agenda items 2, 3, and 4B from the agenda. Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Okay, it appears the motion is going to carry unanimously. Would the board consent to giving the county administrator authority to advertise for our second meeting in September for those two items? We can always not have the public hearing, but it at least keeps us on a path to advertise in a normal time frame.
I'm comfortable with that.
So we don't have all the information, so we're going to go from first reading, and if there's any issues, right to public hearing.
We are going to advertise for the public hearing just to make sure we keep going. And then if we don't have information, if there are any issues with the public hearing, we can always cancel the public hearing. It's easier to, excuse me?
Turn your
We
mic
have
on,
to
Nancy.
re-advertise, yes. But what we would be doing is allowing us to still be on the same track of having the actual public hearing the second meeting in September.
But if we don't have the minutes that the planning commission worked so hard on at least a few days before our next meeting, then that's just money thrown away in advertising. Do we have any idea I know that's a lot of minutes. They work hard. They discuss a lot of things. And it's going to take us some time to go through it because I want to know what the planning commission has said and what they've worked so hard on. Do we have any idea when that information will be available to us?
I don't have that information, but I'm sure Mr. Cully will make sure we get that information.
So I would think we should wait until we have it in our hands and have time to see it before we spend money advertising for a public hearing.
We would only be, we would then be advertising in October or for an October meeting.
We could also call for a second meeting in September.
All right, let me offer maybe a solution, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
They may not like it, but if this is the case,
I like everything.
then why can't we simply have a second meeting in September?
We do.
We do have a second meeting in September.
Then why, okay, I'm sorry, you're right. This is on, right, one meeting. Okay, so
We don't have time to advertise between the first meeting and the second meeting.
then it would be in October if we
Right.
pushed it back. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's,
We've done this before. It's not like it's
Yeah.
the very first time we've ever advertised for something and then had the public hearing or didn't have the public hearing. We've done it both ways.
No, but this is.
Just the second
this will-
meeting in September or
This will
the,
be the second time we haven't had planning commission minutes. And we did public hearings last board meeting
that.
with no planning commission meetings for two projects.
and I would agree with you. If we don't have planning commission meetings, or minutes, we don't have to have the public hearing. I'm just trying to keep the same schedule we had before.
Well, if we can get a commitment in order to have that as a requisite for having the public hearing, then I think we can move forward. And
I think
hopefully we can get that.
That's where I am.
And it emailed to us days
Okay.
prior, either before the packet comes out or as soon as they're done, but no later than when the packet comes out.
Can you put that in motion and we'll go ahead and take it?
I'll make a motion that we
Advertise for the September 26th.
advertise for items 2 and 3 with the requisite that our planning commission minutes discussing these two items are provided to us at least 5 days in advance,
Advance of what?
Advance of the meeting.
of the meeting,
The first meeting in September.
first meeting in September.
September 12th.
12th?
By the September 12th meeting, because the public hearing wouldn't be until the 26th.
Right.
Oh, that's even easier. Okay.
All right.
By the September 12th meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously. All righty, Mr. Hughes. It's taken a while, but I think you wanted to have the planning commission come to order.
Yes.
Would you do that now, please?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the board. I am Bob Schwartz of the Bowling Green District. I am the chairman of the Planning Commission. Present with me tonight is Mr. Richard Williams of Western Caroline and Dr. Carol Horton of the Port Royal District. At our last meeting, work session on July 22nd, we adjourned the meeting until tonight. And based upon that, it's my pleasure to reconvene our work session meeting, and we're pleased to be in a joint session with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All righty, now we can talk transportation. Mr. Bates, I guess you're here, the first one from VDOT. Oh,
Actually,
I want you right away. You know how it is. Mr. Hughes?
so Mr. Bates is going to come into the agenda. So
Okay,
if you don't have any issues, we'd like to follow the agenda that we have.
I just wanted to get right to the meat, you know?
It's all me.
Okay.
So good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Tonight, we're here to discuss the future of transportation planning in Caroline County. And to help with the discussion, we have representatives from VDOT, the George Washington Regional Commission, VRE, and the Fredericksburg Regional Transit. So I'd like to take a moment for those individuals to introduce themselves.
Oh, see, you just wasted time. You got here anyhow.
I'm just doing introductions. I'm going to sit back down and let Leon take over. But to introduce the VDOT team with me tonight, first, I'm Kyle Bates. I'm the resident engineer for the Fredericksburg residency, which includes Stafford, Spotsylvania, and Caroline counties. With me tonight, I have also the Assistant District Administrator for Project Development, Michelle Shropshire, back there. We have the District Planner, Stephen Haynes. We have the Assistant District Planner, Cassie Lord, here. And we have the Assistant Residency Engineer for Land Use and Permits, which is Carolyn Oster. She's my Assistant Residency Engineer. And then additionally, we have Mr. Jonathan Dries, who is our Edge Associate and Trainee. So he's here just to take it all in. So lots of people from around the district to kind of touch on anything transportation related, hopefully answer a lot of questions and have some good back and forth conversations. So.
Thank you, Mr. Bates. A couple of names are familiar. Now, which one is responsible for the speed study on 639?
Oh, that's going to be me.
Gotcha. That's why we wanted you first.
Yeah, right.
All right. Mr. Hughes?
Hi, I'm Melody Fowler. I'm with FX Big O, and I'm the Deputy Director. So I look forward to working with you all.
Hi there, good evening. Nick Ruiz, I'm the Planning Program Manager with the Virginia Railway Express, and I'm joined by my boss, Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine Hefner. I'm the Virginia Railway Express Director of Planning and Environmental Policy.
I'm Ian Ollis, Chief Cook and Bottle Washer at the George Washington Regional Commission, and sometimes the FAMPO Administrator when you like me a lot. With me is my colleague, Carrie Eves, and we're representing the George Washington Regional Commission's Transportation Planning, which for us is what we call rural transportation planning. So I'm not here representing FAMPO. Tonight I have nothing to do with FAMPO. I'm just here for the George Washington Regional Commission. It's good to see you. We're a little shell-shocked, those of us who are employees of various government departments over there, because we were kind of expecting more of a workshop session, kind of sitting around the boardroom table or in a room where we would discuss things with you and get feedback. So we're a little bit shy tonight, but we will give you our best input that we can, and we hope you'll ask questions and debate with us. We came to share with you.
We apologize for the room we're in. We planned to be in the other room where there were tables and chairs, but the videographer said this was better for him. If you'd like, you can come up here and sit with me. Okay.
So now that the introductions are done, let's look at the agenda for tonight. So we will conduct an overview of our current challenges, an assessment of current infrastructure, future goals, and strategies that may be used as we move forward looking at transportation in Caroline. So current challenges, there are funding sources available to assist the county with transportation improvements. Currently, we are using our 6-year plan and have used Smart Scale in the past. There may be opportunities to take advantage of grant opportunities, and we are currently awaiting the completion of a Route 1 corridor study, which should produce additional project opportunities. Another challenge for Caroline is population growth. As you know, we are located between 2 population centers, and the most recent Weldon Cooper numbers indicate that Caroline grew 4.7% between the years 2020 and 2022. So population is definitely coming to Caroline. As you know, Spotsylvania is growing rapidly once again, and as well as the Richmond region. If you look across the state, the trend is that most of the metro areas in the state are growing. The city centers are losing population, but those exurbs are certainly growing in population. And so that is certainly going to impact us as we move forward, and it has already begun to impact us as well. So assessing our current infrastructure, existing network challenges, we have needs identified in Carmel Church between Dry Bridge Road and Route 1, improvements at Dry Bridge and Route 207, and on Dry Bridge itself with the curves and the lack of and a road that is not adequate for heavy industrial traffic. Along the 207 corridor between the interchange and the Carmel Church Loop, we have excessive signage, and I've talked with VDOT about the possibility of doing some type of sign diet to try to clean up the signage in that area. There's a an image I'll show you later. In a very short stretch of that road, there are 15 signs giving motorists some type of direction as they come off the interchange. And so it leads to confusion. And so one of the things VDOT has done in other jurisdictions is produce a sign diet, which reduces those signs and sometimes even make them more attractive. So that area is the gateway to one gateway into the county. And so we certainly wanted to be as attractive as possible and not just look like anywhere USA. So in Ladysmith, of course, there, well, continuing in the Carmel Church in 207 area, we have needs for improvements into the future at the intersection of Route 1 and Jericho Road. So also at Ladysmith, of course, there's a future bridge project over 95, which is a big ticket item. We have a bike and pedestrian plan that has been prepared by GWRC, and in our transportation update of the comprehensive plan, it will also include bike and ped accommodations plans for the Ladysmith area. You know, there's a lot of growth in that area. Pendleton continues to grow, and there's a need for pedestrian connections from Route 1 west along Route 639 to make those connections. There are public facilities there that citizens should be able to walk and bike to safely. And right now, that is not the case. If you've seen the work being done on 639 right now, you know there is a pedestrian path as a part of that construction. Also at Page Road, it's a high accident intersection or a high miss intersection. So there's potential opportunity for safety improvements there. And many of our rural roads have minimum pavement width and would be perfect for potential shoulder improvements. So very quickly, I'll go through some images. So this is an image this is what happens 2 or 3 times a week on Route 207. 207 is closed to allow MC Dean to bring their product out. Traffic is stopped. As you can see, that truck is on, I guess that would be the northbound side of Route 207, and the traffic is stopped there. Next slide. So this is the image of the truck making the turn to get back on the correct side of the road at on Route 207. Next slide.
Can you go back a second? Can you go back a second?
So they're crossing.
Judging from where the truck is at Belmont going back towards 95.
That is correct, sir.
Okay.
Next slide. And that same truck came down this road. This is an image of Dry Bridge. You can see the ditch line there where there's been truck traffic on the ditch. Next. And this is just a close-up to bring into focus how narrow this road is and how it doesn't accommodate the existing truck traffic on the road. So this is the corridor 207, and this is the area where I was talking about the signage. As you can see, there are a number of signs in the median as well as on the right side. There's a lot of signage there giving lots of instructions for people. And this happens as soon as you come off the interstate and continue north on Route 207. So this is an image I wanted to bring out the need for pedestrian accommodations. As you can see in the very distant, I wish I could blow this slide up, but in the very distance where that car is at Belmont, there's a image there. It's a young man that is on a scooter. And that young man came down 207, went through this intersection, continued up 207, and then crossed 2 lanes of traffic to turn left into Belmont on a scooter. If you're familiar with the types of scooters that they have like in downtown Richmond where you can rent them for an hourly rate and kind of tool around the city, that's what this gentleman is on.
Motorized scooter.
A motorized scooter, yes. Next slide, please. So this is on Route 207 near the intersection of Route 1 and 207. This gentleman here, I actually stopped and talked to this gentleman. He is a truck driver who was in the area for a couple days, and he was walking back from lunch at the Mexican restaurant there at the intersection. So there's obviously pedestrian traffic in this area, and so a need for pedestrian accommodations. And as you all know, we had a fatality here in the county just yesterday. A pedestrian was hit. Next slide, please. So this is the intersection looking back. This is the intersection of Jericho Road and Route 1, as you can see, going west or north on 207. Limited opportunities. You have a through right and a left turn lane there. And on this particular day, there was an incident on 95, and there was a significant amount of traffic coming off of 95, making that left turn movement onto Route 1. Next, please. So this is looking down at Ladysmith on Route 1, and as you can see, the construction that has begun there. But there again, Ladysmith it's a short distance from that intersection down to Pendleton. If you look at the complete development of Pendleton, there's commercial opportunities that are a part of that project, and it would be a short walk from Ladysmith to Pendleton or vice versa. And right now, as you can see, there's limited accommodation for pedestrians to travel that road, even after the construction is complete. Next. Again, here is looking west towards the intersection of Route 1 on Jericho. And as you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, the pedestrian path that is a part of that project. Next. This is just in the same area where you can see there are curb cuts there for pedestrian accommodations, but you don't see any pedestrian accommodations on this side of that one-way sign there. So it stops there on the other side of that intersection. So if you continue west, then there are no pedestrian accommodations. So this is right by the Dollar General.
Yeah.
Right there. Just for.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
Thank you. Just on this, and I know it's a little bit off, but this was the intersection that last year, a couple of years ago, we had a huge fit because Public Works was mowing it. Mr. Cully, do we have it? It looks awful. It looks absolutely awful. Where are we on getting that taken care of? When we have grass growing out of the drains on that intersection.
Sure.
Okay, you can.
Look at this one.
Sorry to derail. Yeah, just real quick on that one. I do have it on the presentation a little bit later, but we just awarded our manicure mowing contract, which is great. They are actively just getting started in Caroline. I think they were starting in the 207 area, but this is one of the areas that they have submitted.
Are they going to take like the trees growing out of the drains and so forth that have been allowed to grow up for the last
Some
year
of
and a
that
half?
may be sweeping related. We can get out with our crews and take care of that as part of that operation. But the manicure mowing aspect of it, that's getting started now. If there's something growing up in the drain as they go through that area, we can identify those and get them done.
So this contract, because this has been going on all year. So now we're coming to the end of, the next couple of months will be end with the growing season.
Sure.
So this has been going on like this since we started the growing season this year. So is that manicure mowing, do we have to wait till August next year for the same, like in other words, once growing season, you cut it down, we go to winter, are we going to have to wait till August next year to get this taken care of again to start up? Or is that going to be like a continuous?
Is that a yearly contract?
Yeah, this manicure mowing contract's going to be going as much as you all want it to. So
Okay.
we're going to be working.
I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying this has been allowed to happen by us. But all right, thank you.
Well, so the manicure mowing contract, we're going to identify how many repetitions of that the county wants to do above and beyond what VDOT's going to mow, which is only going to be 2 or 3 times, right? And so if we identify, I'm just throwing a number out there, 12 times, we can work with you all on that funding ahead of time with via a maintenance agreement, which I can do in-house. And we're going to talk about that this winter, so we have that ready to go as soon as that season starts. So
Okay. And they will take care of, like, for example, the crabgrass and stuff growing in the curb. They will take care of that.
no, but that's where the area headquarters can jump in and take care of that. So we'll handle that.
Okay.
No problem.
All right. Thank you.
All right, next slide, please. So this is continuing to look west along 639 at the construction that has taken place there. East, I'm sorry, thank you. So east along 639 where the back towards 95. Next slide. And there again, you can see the pedestrian accommodation that's being done as a part of this project. Next. And this is kind of zooming in right now. This is what it looks like. It's kind of a barrel of soup out there. On this day, it certainly was. And so there again, a lot of confusion. This was a weekend and there was a lot of traffic visiting the Sheets and the McDonald's. And so lots of moving parts out there. Fortunately, the VDOT has done a good job of kind of corralling the traffic and getting people to very specific areas to cross 639 and to get back on the interstate. The majority of this traffic was from the interchange to those stores and then back. And then, as you know, we have a Wawa that is got a site plan that's under review right now across the street from the Sheets, and also a Dunkin' Donuts is planned there as well. So there'll be even more traffic there with additional turning movements as well. Next slide. So this is the bridge that is certainly everyone's on everyone's mind. This is a big ticket project, and we'll talk later about ways to kind of segregate this project from other projects in the county so that we can start to tackle and deal with this issue. As you see, it's a 2-lane bridge with some significant site distance issues there. And I think there was some options that Kyle and his group may talk about a little bit later for that bridge. Next slide. Excuse me. So this is there again, looking back towards Route 1 to the west, and you can see if you envision what the ultimate build out of this project will be, 4-lane divided with the signalized intersection there at the Sheets as well. So this is taken from the Sheets driveway. Next slide. So I put this slide in here because this slide represents what is typical of many of Caroline County roads. This one is probably better than many. This is probably a road with at least 11 to 12 feet of pavement that is striped, but there are many roads and rural roads in Caroline that are not in this good a shape. So they would be ripe for shoulder improvements out into the future. Thanks. So this is a slide here, and as I say, if you look beyond where that the change in the color of pavement is there, this is along Jericho Road. You can see there, that's probably more typical of what the roads look like in the rural portions of Caroline County. So I just wanted to provide you those images to kind of see what we're dealing with. And so right now we'll have Nick Ruiz and Melanie from VRE and Fred provide you some information on options and opportunities that they may have out into the future and for things for the board to consider. So.
No way I'm going back to Fred. No.
A couple of slides. So as I said, Nick Ruiz, I'm the planning program manager with the Virginia Railway Express, and fortuitously, we're in the middle of a big long-range plan update for our system. It's called our System Plan 2050 update. And what I'm going to be talking about specifically in this presentation is some of the concepts that our operations board is looking at us to pursue for 2030. So we've kind of defined a midterm year. I felt like presenting 2030 was a little bit more palpable in a forum like this because 2050 is, whoa, that's a long way away. But 2030, it's 7 years. So basically, we started the system plan update process by, by taking a look at where the population and the jobs are going to be growing in the entire Virginia Railway Express, service area. And if you're not familiar, the southernmost terminus of the VRE Fredericksburg line is at the Spotsylvania station off of Route 17. So we don't operate in Caroline County. But essentially, the outer stations along our Fredericksburg line and the catchment areas around those stations, including portions of northern Caroline County, are going to see pretty tremendous growth, projected to be 15% growth by 2030, and between 2030 and 2050, over 35% growth. And that's by far the highest growth area of any of the other areas in our system. And so we're looking at ways to accommodate that. We know that there's an increase in long distance commuters that are accessing job centers at Quantico, the Fort Belvoir area, and in the core of DC. And every year, more and more of those folks choose to move to places like Spotsylvania County and Caroline. So to give a sense, we took a look at some of the origin destination pairs within kind of the broader, and I'll show a map on the next slide, the broader kind of VRE service area. for weekdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And in the weekday peak, so that's the AM northbound peak, the zone that we're defining as Caroline County west of 95, so that's kind of Ladysmith area, all the way up to Central Fredericksburg, South Stafford, really pops when you look at the level of demand for the plus 25-mile trips. And I just want to underscore, though, that VRE as a commuter rail service, really our niche is providing transportation options for people needing to make those longer trips. We're not going to be able to solve congestion that occurs when people are trying to make 2, 3, 4, 5-mile trips, to their grocery store, to the church or whatever. Yeah. But we're really very well suited for the folks that need to drive to 95 and then go 60, 70 miles up to DC. But we need to be realistic that the majority of long distance trip making is originating in areas far from current VRE stations. A lot of the current residential development is lower density and it was not planned immediately adjacent to our VRE stations in other counties. That's presented a problem in places like Stafford County and Prince William, where people are still having to drive far distances on local county roads to access the VRE stations to go into DC. This slide, it's a little bit blown out for the folks in the back, but hopefully on your screens you can see it a little bit better. This represents the long distance weekday AM trip origin zones with trips that are greater than 25 miles, start or end in Virginia, and again, shown by origin. And you can see the area in the western part of the county west of 95 is really where most of those long distance trips are occurring. There are no Caroline County nodes that are in our top 25. Those are all occurring closer to the district, but there is a considerable amount of trip making. And then on the next slide.
Nick, what do you mean by top 25? Top 25 destinations or
top 25
travel points?
Travel flows, I guess you could say. So like number one in the region is Centerville, if you know where Centerville is, like in off of 66, Centerville to the DC core. That's the number one. And then there's 24 others. I don't know exactly what number the Caroline County zone was, but it was not in the 25. But I just wanted to show that it is up there along with some other areas like Culpeper and Stafford County.
But now the 95 line, which is what I would consider Carolina and Spotsylvania, is totally different than the 66 line. So where does the 95 line rank? Does it have number 3, number 4, or do you know?
So our Fredericksburg line origin destinations probably within that top 25. I'd say a good 15 of those top 25 origin destination pairs are on the Fredericksburg line. But again, they're places farther north than here. They're Stafford, Prince William County, and that. Yeah. And then on the next slide, this is a look at what's going on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. So all of a sudden, you guys are in the top 25, but your zone that really pops there is what we're calling the Doswell Southwest Bowling Green zone, which I think everyone can understand what's going on a Saturday or a Sunday down there. People are going to Kings Dominion and Meadow Event Park when there's events, but really it's Kings Dominion that's driving a large portion of that demand. And then in addition to that, some of the local travel that's accessing some of the businesses off of the Rutherglen, the 207 exit.
How do I get to Kings Dominion from Spotsylvania?
On VRE, well, you can't right now.
But if I take VRE from DC, I end up at Spotsylvania. So how do I get to Kingston? Is there a bus? I don't know.
So I guess I should have mentioned. So this is just analyzing all trips. So this is car, transit, bus. This is everyone.
Okay.
So because what we wanted to do is start from square one and understand what are people doing, how are people moving about the region. Before we started to get specifically into, where is transit use happening?
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
currently there is no transit service to that part of the to that part of the region. So, on the next slide, you can see that quantified. So on the weekday there are 2 trips, two origin destination pairs in the VRE service area, current or future service area. And the one that really sticks out is Caroline County to the central Fredericksburg, South Stafford area and back. And so there's about 800 trips occurring on an average weekday, in each direction. So about 1,500 individual trips. Again, these are not transit trips. These are just trips. These are probably almost 100% going by, automobile. But it gives you a sense of the scale of people just making those, plus 25-mile trips. On the weekends, on the next slide, there's a few more, right? So you've got a decent amount of travel going to and from the Short Pump area out west of Richmond, as well as, Central Fredericksburg, South Stafford, as well as Spotsylvania between Route 3 and 208. And so, it doesn't take a lot of creativity to understand what's going on here. You've got people in Caroline County going to the 3 major malls and, shopping sites on the weekends. That's what's happening on Saturdays, and I think on Sunday it's very similar. If you move to the next slide, similar zones popping out.
Mr. Black.
This is a question for you. Where do you? I love this data, but where do you get it? Like, how do you know? How do you know someone is? It's very.
So we use a company, a vendor called Streetlight, and they use what's called location-based data. It's all anonymized data, so it's like this is cell phone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's going between point A and point B. Yeah, I know. It's cool, isn't it? Maybe a little creepy.
I don't know. Some people say it's cool.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But what it does
is a relative term.
It allows us to really drill down at a pretty high level of detail and understand, what number of people are going between what zones. So
it's the same thing, Mr. Black, as the signs you see on the road that say Springfield 25 minutes. There's a transponder in your car that it's registering that you probably didn't know about.
Yeah. And so it's a third party company that you buy their service, you buy their data basically. And we're using that to inform our decisions. So
yeah, they already know you're there. Okay, we're just discussing the technology and fascination. Nick, go right ahead.
Yeah. So if you're aware of a Commonwealth initiative called the Transforming Rail in Virginia Initiative, that's where the Commonwealth has worked with CSX, the freight railroad operator, to buy half of their right-of-way to expand passenger rail service between Richmond and Washington, D.C. VRE is a major beneficiary of that. It's going to allow us to run a lot of additional service between Spotsylvania and DC by 2030. A major linchpin of that plan is something that's not occurring anywhere in this area, but it's up in DC across the Potomac River. That's the Long Bridge. The Commonwealth is building a second 2-track bridge to allow for that fluidity across the river in and out of the city. And so what we're trying to do is the Commonwealth basically built a house, and so they need to furnish it, so to speak. And how can we best position our service to take advantage of the capital investments that are occurring on the corridor in places, including Caroline County, because there are a number of rail sidings that they are building, one of which I believe is in the county to help with the fluidity to get passenger trains and freight trains out of each other's ways. So just wanted to kind of preface that all of this stuff is being done under the guise of Transforming Rail in Virginia.
Nick, before you leave that point, at Spotsylvania, there's a third rail or third set of rails. That belongs to VRE, right?
The third track, no, that's a Commonwealth-owned track, right?
Well, it previously had been owned by CSX, but then with the Transform Rail in Virginia and the Commonwealth taking ownership of the right of way, they are now.
So just that third set, or half?
They basically split the right of way down the middle, and the Commonwealth has ownership on the west side of the road.
Oh.
Hi. The Commonwealth has ownership of the eastern half of the right-of-way in the Caroline County and Spotsylvania County area. And then up in Fairfax County near the Lorton area, it shifts and they take ownership of the west side of the right-of-way and then into the Washington, D.C. area. So, varies, but they own at least one track, and in some cases, the Commonwealth will own 2 tracks in the Northern Virginia area.
Okay, the question behind my question was VRE's tracks stop at Spotsylvania, but basically what you're saying is they don't necessarily stop at Spotsylvania. We had a problem for a long time because all the rail lines were owned by the freight companies.
Mm-hmm.
So CSX had all of it, and we had a hard time to try to get VRE on their rail.
Yes,
So-
and now with transforming rail in Virginia, VRE through agreements with the Commonwealth and the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority will have rights to operate passenger service and expand our passenger service, as Nick said, within the Fredericksburg Line corridor and the Manassas from Manassas into DC.
So you don't need anything special to extend from Spotsylvania into Caroline.
Well, we need jurisdictional support and a change in our governance structure, because that's, if you remember several years ago, Spotsylvania County joined VRE, and I wasn't there for that. I think Christine, you were at VRE during that process, but it basically involved the 2 commissions agreeing and our operations board agreeing, to allow another jurisdiction to join. So, but I'll let Christine talk more about that.
Yeah, it's a somewhat complex arrangement as far as the governance of VRE, and in order to have VRE service within a jurisdiction, you basically become a member jurisdiction of VRE, and there are certain obligations that the county would enter into. Part of it is imposing a regional gas tax, and there's other contractual agreements with, in the case of Caroline County, if there was an interest in joining VRE, it would likely be the Potomac and Rappahannock Transportation Commission that would have to be, agreed upon, and, to become a member of VRE and then eligible for VRE service. There would also need to be agreements as far as the funding of any capital improvements, including additional track that would be required to support the service and station facilities, that would have to be worked out with the commissions. And if there is interest in exploring the more specific details of that, I can provide feedback to Leon of both the CEO at Virginia Railway Express, Rich Dalton, and Bob Schneider, who's the executive director of the Potomac and Rappahannock Transportation Commission, to delve into the specifics of that if you're interested.
Okay. Thank you. I know we'd gone back about 20 years ago, so we talked about it in different times. We talked about it. So I was just curious, and maybe you could get that to Leon. Ms. Long had a question.
Yes, about 8 years ago, there was a stir about a new line going in that was not going to be right beside the existing line. Please tell me that is still dead and gone, and you are simply talking about a 3rd track access along the already existing railroad track.
And you're referring to in Caroline County, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think what you were referring to is the DC to RVA, the high-speed rail at one point. Supposedly, yeah. So about, I would say, let's say 5 years ago now, the state, and working with the federal government on an environmental document, determined that the best course of action was not to go out, in what we call greenfield alignment, not to go outside of the right of way with any rail improvements, in the future, that all rail improvements would stay generally within the existing CSX right of way. And that led us to the transforming rail in Virginia, where the Commonwealth was able to work with CSX to purchase half of the right of way. So, yeah.
That makes a lot more sense than what was being thought of. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mr. Black, you had a question?
Mr. Seeley.
Mr. Seeley had a question?
Yeah, I was going to go back to, we talked to VRE 10 years ago, maybe 12.
Longer
And
before that.
it was right around that time. I was on the board when we did this, and they wanted at that time $130 million in track improvements. And even talking to VRE, they said, we didn't fit into their model locality for joining. And just the track improvements alone, to me, were completely a dissuasion from ever thinking about it. Because 10 years ago, $130 million is probably over $200 million today. And I don't see with the train station in Spotsylvania being strategically located for the Route 1 corridor for Caroline, if you want to use VRE, it's very simple to go up Route 1 and shoot up 17 and get on the train there than ever spending all those dollars anywhere in Caroline to become part of VRE or even part of the train, because it's just very cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
I think you're correct. I was with VRE at the time, and the numbers you cite seem like they're probably within the range of what I recall. But with the Commonwealth acquiring the right of way, and they are making some improvements, as Nick said, there are some sidings in Caroline County. I think what it would take or what would be required has probably changed. So if there's interest, I can work with Leon and have either a representative from VRE or even the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, make a presentation to a future work session or a board or some other meeting to share more information about what in the current context with state ownership of the right-of-way, what might be required.
Because I just think the Spotsylvania station is way more convenient for us in terms of where our population is, even from Bowling Green to go down Route 2 to 17, makes a lot more sense than trying to traverse Carmel Church or any place else in the county right now. Or even if you were to go to somewhere like on Stonewall Jackson Drive, the road will in no way support the kind of traffic that it should for a VRE station.
Mr. Black, you had a question?
Yeah, wouldn't the other member jurisdictions have to agree to us coming in?
Yeah.
And then wouldn't they also have to bear a cost with Caroline? Like, don't they, in other words, since they maintain the line, they would have to extend the line, so there would be more line for them to maintain, correct?
It's a pretty complex formula, but it's based on the riders that originate from each jurisdiction. And so everyone, essentially there would be a readjustment, because today there are a certain number, it's a small number, certain number of Caroline County residents that go to Spotsylvania to catch the train. And so they're not counted in Spotsylvania's number, but they're borne as what we call a system expense. So everyone basically has to pay for those riders. So that would adjust a little bit. But then there's also a capital piece, but it's all broken down based on rider home jurisdiction, basically.
Yeah.
So
we
wouldn't, but what I'm saying is, we wouldn't have, like, for example, like, we would have a very small compared to Spotsylvania and Fredericksburg and Stafford. So wouldn't that mean that either, if it's, I guess I'm just thinking, like, if it's on us, the onus is on us, and they say you can come in, if we can't afford that, number one. And number two, I guess my question, and I've talked to some of the other jurisdictions before, if that has to be borne by them, there's no incentive for them to say yes. I mean, if it's going to add more cost to them, like, why would they want to come down to service 50 riders? If I'm Stafford or I'm Prince William, why do I want to extend down to Caroline if it's going to cost my taxpayer more money?
Yeah, and that's, I I can't recall the specifics of
it's more than 50 riders, because I've taken it before when
they're going to incur a cost.
Yeah, that's true. Really, the only thing I'm asking them at this point in time is just to give us an idea what it is. As Mr. Seeley was saying, 12 years ago we looked at it. I can tell you, 20 years ago when we looked at it, the gas tax was what killed it. The board didn't want to impose the gas tax, which was a requirement. So
yeah, that's kind of the first step in joining VRE.
Right.
At least when Spotsylvania joined, that they passed the gas tax, imposing the gas tax within the county,
right,
and other agreements. But that was the big sort of hurdle that they had to overcome as a jurisdiction to make the commitment to join VRE.
Yeah, just to be clear, the capital improvements, whatever they may be on the main line on the rail, are not necessarily borne by the jurisdiction. That the station itself is a jurisdiction expense. So that capital, so laying the parking lot, building the platform, that kind of thing. But the actual any additional track or roadbed improvements that would be required, are typically either borne by the state or through federal grants, capital grants, and that's usually VRE takes charge in obtaining those grants.
I really, can't speak now because we haven't had a new jurisdiction expand, and a lot of this is subject to discussion with the existing VRE operations board and at the commission levels. Generally, that's true. When Spotsylvania joined in, they assumed the responsibility for building the station, but there was already a planned track extension that also supported the station. But it was also related to other commitments that VRE had with CSX. So I'm a little reluctant to give you a definitive, and I can't give you a definitive answer on where those responsibilities lie, but can connect you with folks that can answer those questions.
If you can get us just like a ballpark idea of what it would be, just for the board's kind of understanding and future decision making. Because there was a time when ridership declined and Caroline was actually approached about becoming a member. So we understand the environment changes. So if you could just give us an idea for now, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't venture a guess tonight, but I can
No, not tonight, yeah.
the information.
I mean, at some point in time, if you could get Mr. Hughes that information, I think that would be great, and we'll,
certainly.
we can go from there.
Mr. Chairman,
All right, thank you.
yes, sir. Process as well,
Yes.
if they could include that.
Yeah, the process is all
by which.
right.
Yeah, we can include that. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Nick, you have more?
All right. So just going to keep on going here, give you a little background as to, what's going on in the transit ridership world. We were bumping along just shy of 20,000 average daily riders. And then the pandemic happened. And we've been on a slow but steady recovery ever since. What we were essentially projecting by 2030, which is that kind of midterm horizon year for our system plan, is between 13,000 and 18,000 average daily riders. So just getting back to pre-pandemic levels, in the next 7 years. And so that has really affected and impacted, the way we look at future investments and what, right sizing our system, making sure that we're growing. We're not stopping, looking ahead to growth, but that we're doing it in a more nuanced way. And so basically, when we went to our operations board back in June, we gave them a couple different options that we thought were defensible, based on the data, based on our analysis, for service growth to 2030. We gave them kind of a no build. What if we did nothing? What would happen if we just kept our existing service levels? And what would happen if we did some things? And we had 4 options: A, B, C, and D. And so essentially what our board decided on is that in the weekday, they'd like to see us run system-wide 10 additional round trips on the weekday. So that's a 26 daily round trip system-wide. And so it basically breaks down to 14 on the Fredericksburg line, 14 round trips on the Fredericksburg line, and 12 on the Manassas line. They also are very keen on us to start weekend service. And so what they asked us to take a harder look at is starting weekend service with an initial 6 system-wide round trips. That's 3 on each line. Eventually building to 13 weekend round trips system-wide. So essentially for the Fredericksburg line, for this region, 7 opportunities, 7 round trips on the weekend. And so that's all of the data that we're analyzing, between now and the end of the plan. The planning process is going to be around that alternative, but there's a huge benefit we feel in 2030 with that initial weekend service and the build up to 13 round trips, as well as the additional. It's about 60% additional weekday round trips. And that's really going to move the needle to help bolster the ridership from the previous projection of the do nothing scenario that I presented on the previous slide. So moving to the next slide, today we run, that essentially that pattern on the left, the red line. This is a schematic. Red line is the Fredericksburg line, blue line is the Manassas line, and black is what Amtrak is doing. In the future, by 2030, we've started to talk to our operations board about potentially running some limited express service, because one of the things we found is that our outer jurisdiction riders in Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg, and Southern Stafford really value a reliable, faster trip, and keeping those trips time competitive with driving on the toll lanes on 95 is going to be key through 2030. So we're looking at putting on some additional express service and something else that might serve as a precursor to a future 2050 timeframe geographical service expansion, which is represented in orange. And that's some very limited targeted connecting bus service from other jurisdictions that are outside of our existing, VRE family of jurisdictions to try to test the market, so to speak, in a much more less capital intensive, kind of more fiscally prudent way. And so we've not identified at all exactly where those services would run, but we've just at a very high level said, could you run service from communities or growth nodes in Hanover County, Caroline County, up to Fredericksburg to catch express trains or Amtrak trains to get people farther in. And so we're taking a look at the demand, between Caroline County specifically and DC and other places. So this is we see this as a precursor to a much bigger capital investment. And I think it would be, again, agnostic of who would be operating the service or under what framework, but just seeing that as like a step one to potential service expansion. And then this just basically shows, in that alternative A to C, that purple alternative that our operations board is interested in pursuing, we would have 28 daily round trips, 28 one-way trips, so 14 round trips coming out of Spotsylvania Station, so about a 60% increase off of the existing. And then next slide. And this is just a map representation of kind of where we would explore future connecting bus service. So the orange obviously would be kind of your longer distance over the road coach style, connecting bus service, your commuter bus service, similar to what like OmniRide runs. And then exploring partnerships with local transit to provide key links in some of the areas farther in Prince William County and Fairfax and Loudoun that we don't currently serve today, but we see as a potential market in the future. So just trying to connect all of the regional systems together, by 2030. So, and then on the next slide, just looking ahead, we're not going to stop at 2030. We're going to continue with our operations board and explore what would things look like in 2050. And these are going to be even more general, more high level. But we basically have asked them to consider something from do nothing from 2030 to 2050 to do something very intense with a lot more, service, and what that would look like from a cost perspective and from a market perspective. So, just things to consider, as we look even beyond 2030. And my final slide, what we're doing with our planning process. In October, we're going back to our operations board to present a more refined operating model. It's basically we just drew lines on a map in this first phase, and then in the second phase, we're really going to try to operationalize it, and then really get into more of the discussions on the 2050 scenario. For the period between about October and I'll say late winter of 2024, we're going to be working on the final phase of our system plan, potentially looking at some public workshops on what the public is interested in seeing in 2050, as well as preparing a pretty detailed capital needs assessment. And that's something that we'll be sharing with our jurisdiction partners, certainly with Leon and others, to let everyone know kind of what it would take, right, to provide the service that we need. So, and then continue jurisdiction and transit agency coordination. So that is my presentation. Sorry it took a little longer than I thought, but if you have any additional questions, happy to field them.
I appreciate it. I think we asked some questions which extended it. So,
all right,
very good. And we'll wait to hear from Mr. Hughes when you get back to him about the process and the costs and things of that nature.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Do you have a presentation? because I'd like to cut those bright lights out.
Hi, I'm Melody Feller with FX Big O. So, as most of you probably know, the FX Big O used to be Fred, and we now have done a rebranding. So we did used to service Caroline County, but we no longer service Caroline County. Next slide. So recently we went through a rebranding. I don't know if you've seen in Fredericksburg, our new buses have been wrapped. So we have been trying hard to really increase our service to our riders. We've increased Wi-Fi at our terminals. We've added new accessibility ramps to help our different riders. Next slide. And so really what I wanted to focus on tonight is that we've really been working on getting our ridership numbers up. And as you can see, we've actually now gotten up to where we were prior to COVID. So our ridership numbers are now surpassed what our COVID numbers were. And a lot of this has been due to, we recently went fare free for 3 years with a grant through DRPT. We're currently serving Stafford, Spotsylvania, and the city of Fredericksburg. And currently we're working on our 10-year TSP plan. And in that we are including a little bit about Caroline County. In the future, if Caroline County is interested, FX Big O would be willing to meet with Caroline County to talk about potentially working with you again to bring bus service back to Caroline County if that is something that Caroline County is interested in. Now, if they are interested, it usually takes about 2 years for us to get all the planning, the routes done. And so if you were interested, like say in 2028, we would be able to provide service potentially in 2030. So it'd take about 2 years. So as Caroline County continues to grow, we'd be open to having additional strategic discussions about what the ridership would look like, what areas it would include. And next slide. So currently at this is our operations and our maintenance facility. We also have our central location. We currently have 30 buses. And next slide. And really, I'm just open if you have any questions, or in the future, if you have any questions about working with FX Big O, we are open to it.
Mr. Forehand has a question.
Sure.
2 questions. If you could go back 2 slides.
Sure.
The 2023 ridership, is it start with the July, August, September on the left of the graph?
Yes.
Is that because of a fiscal year?
Yes.
Okay. So your fiscal year's April 1st or March 31st? July. So you know what the ridership's going to be next month?
Not on the top of my head, but our lobby is full, so.
The graph shows there's a number for September of 2023, and we haven't gotten there yet, but.
Yeah, my apologies. I just threw this together right before I came. So my apologies on that.
All right, no biggie. What was the reason for the rebranding?
A lot of the times our buses just were like that tan color. So we decided to, if you want to, could you go to the previous slide? We decided, or to another slide up, sorry. We just decided that it would give a better, fresher look to our branding. So we decided it was time to update it. So we got new uniforms, and it's really lifted morale. And, we're in the process of creating our TSP, which is our 10-year plan. And so, we're really trying to make changes.
So you're saying, I'm sorry. Oh, you done?
Yep.
So you're saying that if we decided tonight, right now, that we wanted to be part of Fred again, it would take 2 years before we could.
About that, yeah. I mean, it might be sooner, but we'd have to really talk about, we'd have to find out where your populations are on the map to make sure that you have the population so that you didn't have empty buses going up to the VRE train station. I mean,
And I see
we
where you
need to make
stopped
it
going there.
successful.
I think all the board members got a email from someone who was disabled and needed to find connections to Fred. I think that's the western side
And
of the county.
our
Route
new
1.
buses, before we had, used to have a ramp, or I'm sorry, a lift that would just lift people up who were on wheelchairs. And we now have a ramp on all the new buses. And we are actually just ordered 9 new buses. So we're slowly removing our old buses and getting the new buses in. And so the ramp actually helps people if they're not just in a wheelchair, but if they're like using a walker to get up to the buses. So we're trying to really update our buses, our facilities.
Ms. Long has a question.
Do you primarily have areas where you pick up and move people to the VRE stations? Are you mostly around town type?
So currently, our VRE services have been suspended, and our also our S4 and S5, which are 2 of our Spotsylvania routes, are currently suspended because of COVID. We had reduced staff, so we are within the next year opening back up our S4 and S5 routes in Spotsylvania, and we'll also be increasing our VRE also.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Chairman, Vice Chair, members of the board, thank you for having me tonight. I'm going to go through real quick just a few highlighted items, my typical board report. Just talk about some of the ongoing projects, some of the upcoming projects, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Hughes to talk a little bit more about the planning. You know, I will say before I go through this report, this is a really great workshop that, and I'm glad we get to participate in it from a VDOT perspective. It really helps us understand the vision of the county, where you want to go with your transportation needs based off of the development, the travelers around the county. So, you know, this is very helpful. We've got a team of VDOT people here that can kind of help with a lot of things, planning and project wise. But you know, I really will say that this is a great opportunity to ask some questions to our folks. I know you talk to me quite a bit, which is great, but we have a lot of brain power at VDOT, some people at the district level that can help answer some questions when it comes to different types of funding sources, different projects, and the ability to get future projects depending on what the needs are. So I'm just going to go through a bunch of the projects that we have going on right now. The first one is the Route 639 Ladysmith Road widening project that's upwards of $30 million. This is the project to widen Ladysmith Road from 4 lanes, divided from I-95 to Route 1. Project is awarded to J.L. Kent and Sons. I will tell you that we have a traffic shift going on this week. Tomorrow, press releases have gone out about that. You saw the signal was activated the other day. That traffic shift is going to switch traffic back over to where they were originally riding on so that they can continue the rest of the work. So that press release has gone out. We are still aiming for spring of 2024 for that project. Just up the road, literally, on Route 1, we have the Route 1 over the South River Bridge rehab. We're in phase 3 of the 4 to rehabilitate the southbound lanes on the bridge by installing an overlay and repairing and strengthening the beams and the substructure. What that is, in the quickest terms I can give, is milling out some of the asphalt that was on top of that bridge, and making sure that you have you don't have a dip in the road at the bridge at that location. So that's to take some of the dead load off of that bridge so that we don't have to post it. That would obviously, for all the reasons, be bad for emergency services and everybody else. So that one is ongoing, and construction is expected to be complete in the summer of 2024. We did complete 652 over Polecat Creek. That one was completed in spring of 2023. Some other project updates. The Route 301 and Chase Street, the Smart Scale project, that's one that I will be going back to the town to present on and give them some options as far as how they want to proceed or not proceed.
Do you know when? Because there seems to be a good bit of confusion on town council since they thought you were going to be there 2 months ago.
I just talked to him like within the last 30 days. So I'll follow up with the town manager as well. But what I'm shooting for is October.
Okay.
So that project is reconstruction of the intersection of 301 and Chase Street. We again will go over some of those options that were approved through the Smart Scale application. The original estimate for that is 11.8 million. That has gone up. I know we're working with our project development team to kind of get a more finite answer on what that is. So when I come to the October meeting to go to the town, I will come with that in hand. No engineering has started. We haven't spent any money on this project, but again, there's been a lot of back and forth about it at the town level. So before we start spending any money on it, I want to make sure that everyone is still on board with the project so that we don't spend money. And then the applicant was actually the county. You all don't want to be on the hook for paying the Smart Scale funds back, I wouldn't imagine. So I want to make sure that we get that all squared away before we start. Another project is Route 638 over the South River. This project is going to require a road closure. The detour is going to be Ladysmith Road to Page Road. That construction is tentatively scheduled fall of 2025 and completed in fall of 2026. As with all of our bridge closures, we will be well in advance coordinating with emergency services, school transportation. Press releases will go out. Route 684, I have included a slide here or a topic to talk about Dry Bridge. I think I'm going to punt that one because we're going to talk about that a little bit later with some of the other slides. I will tell you that our staff at the area headquarters did go out within the last 30 or so days, worked with MC Dean and did some shoulder repairs on some of the curves on the inside of the curve where I know that their tractor trailers and large vehicles that are going through that area were tearing up some of the shoulder work there. So we have put some asphalt on the inside of the curve.
You said you did that in the last 30 days?
I believe so. Yes, sir.
Okay. I
can
there.
send you a picture. I know I've got something.
I was there last week and didn't recall it. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't see any asphalt. So
okay, I'll send you a picture. I know that they did go out there. They sent me pictures of it. So
send me a picture and the newspaper so I know it's the same day.
Okay. Yes, sir. The next one here is the Route 631 Farmer Drive. That was a project through the secondary 6-year plan to realign Farmer Drive right there on 17-2. So construction is beginning this fall. It'll last approximately 30 days. We do have some utilities we're working to relocate that we're having some issues with. So a little bit behind schedule, Mr. Seeley, but it is going to be done before the winter. That is our commitment. So rural rustic, we have Route 680 Rattle Trap. So that one is on schedule for next summer. We have started the environmental work. This is the Rattle Trap, the rural rustic project where we're going to be upgrading to a hard surface and a surface treated road. So that is on construction for next summer. We have already started, like I said, the erosion and sediment control and making sure that we have the plan in place and all the approvals. Another project that I know I've discussed, we looked at sections of Dry Bridge for curve evaluations. So we evaluated curves between 207 and 301 and have numerous amounts of warning signs that are going to be replaced, upgraded, better visibility. And some of the speeds there, are going to be the speed placards being 25-mile-per-hour warning signs. A lot of those are going to be moved and upgraded. That is scheduled for the springtime next year. So we had Route 605 Page Road. That is one of the intersection that is going to be studied through the pipeline study that Mr. Hughes had mentioned earlier on, and we'll talk a little bit more about. We did put up the advanced warning flashers on Page Road. Those are up. They are working. Haven't had any issues since. So that was done in the summer. And the next one here, Mr. Seeley, I know you and I have talked quite a bit about Sparta Road at Passing. We have that work scheduled to be done next week. So we did just get the signs in. So they will be up next week. What's going to happen is there's going to be a night arrow. And then even more important, when I went out there, the way that the curve is right there at Passing Road, it almost makes you want to take Passing as opposed to continuing on to the right. If you're going out of the county, we're going to install some puppy tracks through that curve on the ground, so the lane markings will lead you around that curve appropriately, including a night arrow that will almost make you feel like it's a T intersection. So you know that you have to go right or left, understanding that the road markings are taking you to the way that you have the right of way, which is to the right. So that is going to be completed next week.
That's really important, Kyle, because we just approved a project at the end of Passing Road that'll probably see a lot of traffic. So really appreciate your help there.
Yeah, absolutely. One other item that I know is prevalent, especially to the town here, right at Chase Street, where we were talking about that intersection, we are going to upgrade that to our current standards for a crossover. So there will be striping out there that is going to be double yellow line and some diamonds, some yield diamonds out there. And some signage as well. So that should be done very shortly within the next couple weeks if it's not done this week. Couple other items from a maintenance side of the house. You will see what we call our ATHE operation coming through the area. Right now they're up in Stafford. They'll be moving down to Spotsylvania. They recently completed Route 301 and 207 where we did that shoulder work. You've seen that. That's coming back down this way. They're going to be doing some sections of Route 1. So just be on the lookout for that. We are compiling routes for next year. We're going to really try and focus on routes that we are resurfacing so that when we make an investment on a road to put new surface treatment, cape seal, asphalt, what have you, that we are also protecting the investment. So we're going to be trimming those shoulders, reestablishing those ditches. So we are looking at some of the roads that we are resurfacing next year, which just to we're compiling that list now and getting that contract out to bid. We are well into our resurfacing schedule for this year. Our secondary routes. So you've seen us out and about throughout the county. We did do, there's sections of 95 and then various secondary roads, Page Road, Jericho Road, Hewlett, Alps Drive, Marie Road, just to name a few. Those should be in your board packet. You have those routes, and if you have any questions on any of them, we're getting ready to submit the ones from next year. So I'll be happy to take any questions or anything that you have on that.
All right.
So
You
that
want
is.
it now?
I'm sorry.
You want the question now on resurfacing?
Sure.
Still have Gatewood is still scheduled for the spring, correct?
Gatewood, let me just triple check here. Gatewood Road, yep, that is on the schedule and that will be done before the winter.
All right, I got you on tape. Thank you.
So with that, I can take any questions. I know that we're going to go through quite a bit of information related to projects, secondary 6-year plan, talking about some of the economic development opportunities, but I can take any questions outside of the things that I guess we're going to talk about.
Just, did you have a quick one, Mr. Underwood?
Not a quick one.
Okay.
Now or after the presentation?
We're gonna, yeah, he's got more folks, so we're gonna wait for his presentation. If you just have a quick question, like I think I do. You've got a quick one, Mr. Forehand?
Or three.
Oh, he's cheating. I'm gonna mute you. Go ahead.
Couple regarding 639, the light at Sheets.
Yep.
Where they've started between 95 and Sheets, they've started to create the median.
Mm-hmm.
So they've dug down below the surface.
Mm-hmm.
To get to the Exxon, they put a no U-turn sign at the stoplight.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no way to get to the Exxon if you're coming off 95. And I don't know if that's intentional, if that was just a legacy from when the barrels were up.
Yeah, I can go. What I can do, let me pull the plans, Mr. Forehand, and I can take a look at exactly what is going to be there at the final. Obviously, anytime VDOT is building a project, we want to keep people moving, and the more left turns and U-turns that they have to make is the more time you are stopping the throughput on 639. So understand people have to get where they want to go. So there's
they do stupid stuff when they can't do it a legitimate way. They start getting creative.
Sure. Fair enough. Well, let me take a look at it. I'll pull those plans and I'll loop back around.
The other thing is regarding 639, and it's in several spots, and it's probably intentional. I just don't know the logic behind it. In the areas where they're putting the stamped concrete, one, it's red, and I thought it was going to be dark blue, but that's neither here nor there. One side of the curb is significantly higher than the other.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that when you're going down the road, you can't even see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered literally it's got a slope.
Yeah, it's due to the grade of the road. I mean, if you have, depending on what level, if eastbound versus westbound is, and then there's also some drainage implications.
I mean, this is a curve that's this wide.
Sure.
Like a small median where there's turn lane right here.
Sure.
But literally this curve is 6 inches higher than this curve.
Yeah.
And it's sloped. So if you're in this road over here, you can't even see it. All you see is the top end of the concrete. And it's just, I've never seen it anywhere else, at least never noticed it anywhere else.
Yeah, well, it's a grade differential is what it is. I mean, if you go out on like Route 3, let's say you've got the large concrete walls out there in Spotsylvania. It's the best example.
Which we specifically didn't want with this project.
Right. Well, that's not what this is, right? It's not that drastic, but you do have to have a grade differential. The alternative is you have a wall, right? And that's not, like you said, that's not what you want. So
I don't know.
You have to have that slope to get from up here to down here.
Over a span of 4 feet?
Sure.
We're talking about a 6-inch drop over 4 feet.
Yeah.
On curb heights.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I can take a look at it.
I struggle with that.
Sure. I mean, without seeing it right now, I'll have to take a look at it and loop back around to you.
Okay. That's all my quick ones.
All right. Promise to be quick, Mr. Bates. We've been working with the town. The county and the town have been working together, discussing what it would take for us to put a deceleration lane at the county landfill.
Correct.
On 301. Did you get a chance to put any numbers together or process we would have to take?
I don't have numbers for you, but what I can tell you is we have an opportunity through the secondary 6-year plan. So we're talking about building a turn lane. Again, I don't want to throw a number that you're going to hold me to for the rest of eternity.
I promise not to hold you to it. I just want to.
Sure.
I just want to ballpark it.
But what I will tell you is through the secondary 6-year plan in the outer years, we've got $300,000 to $400,000 available. And there's a turn lane onto a secondary road. So there may be some opportunities through that. I think that's when we talk about what we're talking about tonight with Mr. Hughes. These are the kinds of things that we need to identify. We need to know about. You obviously have brought it up before. We need to identify some funding for it. So to your point, got to get an estimate together. We've got to identify where that funding is going to come from. And then we got to work towards building that project. So these are all very feasible things. We just need to talk about what, as a county, what your priorities are. If that is the priority, we can identify some secondary 6-year plan funds, and absolutely, we can get it done.
Well, it is. I know you heard me say this before, but it is truly a safety concern,
Sure.
Especially in the summer when there's so much traffic on 301 and there's literally nowhere to turn.
Sure.
And there's a fire hydrant if you run off the road.
Yep.
So it's very dangerous. And the town has made a commitment, I think, through Mr. Seeley to say they're willing to work with the county, and that county's going to do whatever it can to relocate that fire hydrant and give you a chance to make it safer for us. I think that's really what we're all trying to work for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what my recommendation is, as we heat up conversations about next year's secondary 6-year plan, we need to get an estimate together, and we need to make sure that we identify funding in the outer years for when that's going to happen.
Okay. All right, thank you, sir. Now, there's Mr. Hughes. There's a presentation we're going to have. Or you just want us to grill whoever comes up?
I think Carrie's going to come down and talk a little bit about our efforts and where we're going there, and then we'll talk about.
Carrie's coming up.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
We do not have a presentation for you, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what we've been working on at GWRC. We are currently helping out with your comprehensive plan. We're working on the transportation chapter. I have a draft here, and when we are all finished with it, we will be sending copies to all of you, and I can actually come and do a formal presentation on it at that time. So what we're doing is amending and updating the old comprehensive plan that you guys did. Actually, we helped you with it back in 2009. So you can guess that it's quite outdated. In that, we're working on your new safety improvements that you need. I'm including in that 2 small area plans that we did for you previously. Bowling Green small area plan and the more recent Ladysmith small area plan, which includes bicycle and pedestrian improvements for that whole area, because as you know, it's growing rapidly, and the original plan for that area was to have a village character, and in order to preserve that, it needs to have all of those bicycle and pedestrian connections. So I'm basically just introducing that work that we're doing for you. And let me know if you have any questions on that.
Any questions for Carrie? Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Carrie, I'll call you later about getting together on that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Black, you're still on GWRC, correct? Okay, so we've got a way to get in touch with you if we need more. Okay.
Sure do.
And it's Mrs. Long. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So now that we've kind of discussed, you've heard from the regional partners, and I think the next big thing for us to talk about are funding options and what is available to the county. I think oftentimes we hear smart scale, revenue sharing, but there are other funding options as well that the county can avail themselves to if, we make the commitment to do so. So there are state resources available, regional resources available, and there are also federal resources available. And so with that, I think now is probably a good time to at least have Ian come and talk about some of those opportunities for funding along the way. And then as we close, one of the things we want to talk about are steps going forward, which is the last item on the agenda. And so we'll discuss at that point some options for moving forward. So
thank you. Thank you very much. Carrie is joining me because Carrie is the smart scale expert. So at our organization, when it comes to smart scale, I just defer to Carrie because Carrie is the person who has to take all the applications for the region, not the locality applications that you all can submit yourselves, but the regional applications, and submit them, literally capture them in the computer, and then call up the localities to say, hey, we don't have the map. Where's the map? We need your documents about the cost estimates. So here's the expert here, and behind us is the VDOT set of experts who then take what we submit and tell us what's wrong with it and work with us to fix it so that we do well. And I must tell you that the George Washington, no, not the George Washington region, the Fredericksburg district of VDOT has the highest, currently, the highest success rate of percentage of submissions actually being approved for funding. Do you know that? In the state of Virginia, a greater percentage of the submissions that we make as a region, including the 5 jurisdictions and the regional projects submitted by the George Washington Regional Commission and FAMPO, achieve the highest rate of funding. That's quite something.
That's very good.
Right?
Yeah, very good.
Carrie also has offered this year to assist Caroline County with applications the next cycle if you have ideas you wish to submit, but you haven't fully got all the documents together. Carrie is prepared to help you, and to a certain extent, VDOT can assist also with some of the documents that you need. So we're available to help you. We want to talk about funding. There are 2 main things I want to tell you before I just talk briefly about the funding options. First thing is, we've just done a quick summary of the growth rate of populations in our 5 jurisdictions: Stafford, Spotsylvania, the city of Fredericksburg, and King George and Caroline County. And the rate of population increase in those 5 jurisdictions increased since the start of COVID. So what you've been hearing from other people, we can see. We showed graphs to the FAMPO committee this week. There is a turn in the graph that goes up. So the rate of people moving into the 5 jurisdictions has gone up. Historically, the George Washington Regional Commission, as a planning district commission, has been vying for the top slot in the state of Virginia for the rate of increase. And that rate just went up. So all of those people are moving into the 4 counties in the city of Fredericksburg, and each one of them arrives with 1 car, 2 cars, 3 cars. I don't know how many cars. They arrive with their automobiles, and they're going to drive on the roads. So what we thought was a congestion problem is going to become a congestion problem on steroids, because the population is growing really fast. Richmond is also exploding. Since COVID, people have left DC and they've moved to Richmond, they've moved to Caroline, they've moved to Spotsylvania. Spotsylvania is exploding, and it's going to create a traffic headache in the future, and we need to be aware of that. In terms of funding, often we have to come with bad news and say, well, the problem is big and there's no money to fix it. But I've got a little bit of good news. First piece of good news is a program that we are running called the Safe Streets for All program. 2 of your members are members of the George Washington Regional Commission and will know about it. You have contributed a small amount of matching funds for us to get a federal grant to run this program. And the program is in 2 parts. The first part is that we have to draw up a Safe Streets for All action plan. We are hiring a consultant. It's on the agenda for the GWRC board meeting to assist us with drawing up the action plan, but we do need participation from the 5 jurisdictions. So we need, believe it or not, your emergency services to send somebody to participate, and your planning department, because the action plan has to be derived here locally with us. VDOT is assisted by helping us identify the roadways and sidewalks and areas, neighborhoods that have a safety problem, where the crashes have occurred, where the injuries have occurred, where the fatalities have occurred. And so we've been identifying those in advance of the study. Now we have to get together and look at those problems and decide what the solutions to those problems are, and then identify which solutions we're going to pick to implement over the next 5 years. The next piece of good news is that the federal government has allocated a vast amount of money to be spent on implementing those projects. So the Safe Streets for All program has two parts. The first part is draw up the plan. The second part is assist with the funding to implement the plan. They will give 80% of the cost of every project that meets a safety need that we've included in the plan and that we commit to implement up to the available funding in each of the next, I think it's additional 4 calendar years. So year one, we do the plan, and then approximately 4 years, once a year, 3 to 4 years, we can submit an application for that year's group of projects, and the federal government will give us 80% of the money. So Carrie and I and our colleague Becky Golden have been thinking about this and thinking about our jurisdictions, and we became concerned that some of our jurisdictions might not include too many projects because you'll be concerned about finding the 20% match, right? So you might say, well, we'll only do one project because we can't afford a lot of match. And so we did a couple of naughty things. We went to talk to VDOT and they said, no, we can't use any of their funds for the match. And then I went to talk to VDOT again and they said, well, we'll get back to you. And then I went to talk to them again. And finally, we got a little bit of good news this week. If they get confirmation, which we're waiting for, we would be able to use some funding, which,
Is Kyle still here?
Kyle over there.
Oh, okay.
He's hiding so we can't see his face.
Which Kyle wants to use to do things like repair your soft shoulders where the road is crumbling on the edges, on the rural roads. He has funding. It's part of that funding is called telefees, which is a tax that comes in to the state and into VDOT to be spent on this sort of thing. But my argument to VDOT is, well, if the federal government will give us 80% of the money for the repairing those roads in rural areas that have safety concerns, why don't you put 20%, the other 20% in where you are able to from things like the telefees, and then it will assist our smaller jurisdictions to be able to fund those projects on those safety roads. None of this can I promise you tonight, but I'm getting a green light saying that is possible, which will mean the first couple of projects over the next 5 years, we may be able to get the 20% match for you, or at least some of the 20% match for you, so that perhaps your first project every year, you won't have to come up with a match. So maybe you can put 2 projects a year into the system and you only come up with a portion of the match instead of having to get 20% on every project. That's good news. If we didn't push that button, we wouldn't have got anything. Now it looks like we may get some. We're very grateful for the little sum, because even if it's a small amount of money, you can multiply it by 5. You get 5 times the shoulder hardening than you would have got if you just used the telefees, for example. It's complicated. I won't bore you with the details. We're working on it. But I must thank VDOT for trying again and again until we've found a little way that we can do this for you.
Actually, it's
not been done before. So I think this is the first time that this grant has been available. And it's the first time we've been able to twist somebody's arm to say, okay, maybe we can do this. I think we'll be able to do it. So at least maybe 1 project a year won't cost you a cent. Depending on what the size of the project is, it won't be a $5 million fancy improvement, but for real safety needs specifically. The proviso is it has to meet a safety need, and we will work with your jurisdiction to identify the projects that will meet the need, that will fix the problem. So we will need your participation. We will need the emergency services to come and look at the plan and say, yes, we agree, that's what you need on that street, or no, that's not what we need this other thing. And your planning department. So that's the first project. It's a 5-year program. For 5 years, you can get up to 80% of your safety projects, which are roadway improvements, sidewalk improvements, protected crossings at schools, this type of thing. We can get 80% of the money from the federal government, which is substantial if you put in a few projects in each jurisdiction across the 5. This could be a very large program. And we also know that in the first round, the program was undersubscribed. not enough places in the United States applied for the money. So the second and third round is going to have more money available to spend because it carried over to the next year.
Yeah, they've got $5 billion for 5 years.
Yeah, I don't have that number in front of me, but yes.
I do.
I'm glad that you do. The second thing, somewhat more controversial, is wearing my other hat for 2 seconds. FAMPO has agreed at their next meeting to have a discussion about future funding for larger transportation projects in the region. One of your projects that you're concerned about, I know, is this bridge over the I-95 that you need, but there doesn't seem to be an ideal source of funding to help with that. And each county and the city have got one or two of these big projects that they want to try to get addressed. But it's a large amount of money to find. So if you don't get it funded in smart scale, how are you going to get it funded? So we're going to have that discussion. We're going to talk about federal grants that might be available and how best to go after them. We're going to talk about how what things cannot be funded by smart scale, for example. And we're also going to be looking at an idea which you've heard about before. It's been floated in the legislature in Virginia, in Richmond, by politicians at the state level, which is to the possibility of having a regional transportation authority in the region. Now, it's come up, I think every year for the last 3 years, somebody has put in a request to have a regional transportation authority. Those particular people have not discussed that with FAMPO or the George Washington Regional Commission. I don't believe they've discussed it with you all or any of our jurisdictions. It's made us all mad because we don't like other people to do things to us without consulting us. So what we would also like to include in that workshop is a discussion about what we really think about a regional transportation authority in our region, not when we're fighting with somebody who did it without consulting us, but when nobody's proposing it at the moment. We want to talk about the principle, what the costs and benefits are of doing this. So that discussion is going to be happening on the 18th of September at the next FAMPO Policy Committee meeting. And King George County Supervisors, a couple of them approached us and said, if you're going to have that discussion, we would like to participate because we also want to hear what others in other jurisdictions have to say. So I've been instructed by the FAMPO Policy Committee to invite specifically King George and Caroline to that particular meeting. It's Monday, the 18th of September. The meeting starts at 6 p.m. and I've been told, like tonight, to get the policy committee meeting on that night over really quickly so that we can have a workshop on future funding. There is a report being prepared by the UMW, the university, and the FRA, the Fredericksburg Regional Alliance, Curry Roberts, and those folks, on what the other three regional transportation authorities are doing in the state of Virginia, the one in Hampton Roads, the one down the road in Richmond, and the one in Northern Virginia, how they operate, where they get the money from, and look at some of these proposals by politicians that have been put into the legislature's process and never succeeded, mostly because of the opposition of those who were never consulted. The idea is to look at the numbers and see if it really makes sense or not for our region. So I'm officially inviting you tonight to be there. You do have members who represent you there, although they're non-voting members. We're saying, please come, at least one of you come and be part of the conversation and give us your views so that we can hear what the region thinks about this when there's no time pressure, when we don't have a new bill that somebody's, Senate bill, blah, 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 that's now staring us in the face and we have to react to it quickly to kill it because we weren't involved in the process.
Have you read the last 2-3 bills that have actually been put in for the transportation district?
Yes, I actually went down to Richmond and also spoke to the sponsor of the very last one.
Because I spent a good bit of time on the phone with state legislators as those were being debated. And my concern is that the small localities, Caroline and King George, with the way all of them are structured, there is there's actually a person in charge that gets hired to actually run the whole transportation district. And the voting power will be a lot like FAMPO, in that the bigger the jurisdiction and the more they have, the higher influence. I'm just concerned, and I'm saying this to all of my board members so that you know that it's been said, is that we can't compete. You know, Spotsylvania and Stafford completely outweighs, and the city of Fredericksburg shares so many services with those two localities that it's a natural fit for them.
They win by default.
Exactly. And that is my concern, is that we don't get a voice because we don't, and we'll end up paying whatever portion there is will come solely out of Caroline and King George, and I've talked to the supervisors there, that we won't get the proportional return on that investment because of, as you've just said, they have a lot of very large transportation projects that have a higher influence and a higher value than ours do. So I will just leave you with that, because I've read the legislation. I've talked to state legislators in both the Senate and the House. And if we get stuck in that, we will be the losers in that, the way every one of these transportation districts is structured right now.
That's the whole point of having the discussion, is to test out what people's views are, to see whether it's a non-starter or whether it's something we should think about more, research more, whether there's a different permutation that can be put on the table that might work for us. That's not like what they do in Hampton Roads, for example.
Just remember, the person that put that in represented 4 precincts in Stafford County, and none of the rest of the jurisdiction did they represent. And that bill was 1 short in the Senate. It got 20, it needed 21 because it was a funding bill. If it had not been a funding bill, it would have probably passed. And the burden, and I don't know that we have the legislative power to curtail some of that if we can't stop it and we don't negotiate. And right now, Northern Virginia's got the votes and the ability, because they're looking for the dollars for themselves. I'm just trying to be fair up front for what I think we're all looking for, because we get stepped on because we're not nearly the size and don't have the strength, either legislatively or economically, to compete in that.
Absolutely. There are ways around some of those problems. One of those is what they've done in Richmond is to give 50% of the money back to the jurisdiction where it was raised, straight up front, before you do anything. So that already returns half of the money to you that was raised in your jurisdiction.
But we're still paying for the transportation district staff that comes along with that. So our 50% sounds good until you start putting the tax on to support what that is.
So that's the point of running numbers, right? And they're preparing those numbers. The second thing you can do is to agree a set of minimum initial projects that you will fund when you have such an authority. So you don't go into it blind, you go into it with, here are 7 projects which we will systematically build over the next 10 or 15 years, and you agree to that up front, that these will be the first projects, and you don't start looking for other new projects until you've funded at least these, however many they are. There are different ways of structuring it so that it can work to the benefit of those who are involved. The final thing I'll say, and I don't want to make this all about this issue tonight, but the final thing I'll say is some of the money proposed in that last version is tax that is already being raised in your jurisdiction, and it's being given to Hampton Roads to fund their roads. So at least that portion you might want to get back, and the only way of getting it back is to have a transportation authority to collect it, to put it in a trust and give it back to this area. Now that's
before you leave that point.
Yes, sir.
Would we be able to capture all of the gasoline tax that we generate in our area?
That's a more complicated question.
Because we send $50-60 million down to Richmond every year and we don't get anything back.
That's a more complicated question. The portion that is allocated to roads in the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, my understanding is that they get to choose which roads to spend the money on and which projects to spend the money on. So effectively, in practice, you're getting control over that funding. But it's more complicated than that, and I can't in a 2-minute thing just go through all those nuances. It's the gas tax that is in existence now. It's not a one-to-one game. It's complicated. We need a proper presentation to explain that. So we're looking at expertise on numbers to actually give you some numbers to look at in terms of that. It's not a one-to-one. It's complicated. Then 3 more points, and then my friend Carrie is going to take it home with Smart Scale. And those 3 points are, well, 2 points. When it comes to the funds that pay the George Washington Regional Commission to do transportation planning for Caroline and King George, it comes from a grant called the Rural Transportation Grant. That fund was set up decades ago, and a specific annual allocation was given to be used for planning in your 2 districts, the same as the rest of the state of Virginia. However, nobody has been able to identify a single occasion when the original amount of funding that is set aside annually was increased. It has not been increased for decades. And so what is slowly happening is that as costs go up to operate, to pay the rent, to do the things we do, you're getting less work done because the funding is eroding against inflation every year, and it's been like that for 20 or 30 years. I don't know what the date was that that grant was started, but it has not gone up once, and we can't do anything about that. It would take, I believe, the Virginia state collectively, assuming the legislature or VDOT, to negotiate an increase for that, but it's never gone up. So as time goes on, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. It already is worse than when it was started. Just want to make you aware of that, because I know, as Mr. Celia just said, you talk to your colleagues in Richmond, and this is something which they have not increased for many, many, many years, and it's going to impact how much work we can do for you. And with that, I'm going to ask Carrie just to tell you there are some changes in Smart Scale coming, but Carrie is the expert on what's currently happening and can talk to you about your submissions and also about the regional submissions that we do for the George Washington Regional Commission.
Carrie, did you give us these? You're responsible for giving us these?
I have not given you anything. No, those are from Steve. Those are going to be some from Steve, yes. Stephen Haynes.
Okay.
Right there.
All right, thank you.
So in fact, if there's something you want to ask him about.
No, I was curious what they said your Smart Scale, and these were put on our desk, so I was wondering where they came from, but you've identified, yeah, they say Smart Scale.
So all I'm going to talk about is GWRC and FAMPO's role in Smart Scale.
Okay.
So VDOT will probably expand upon that. So all I really wanted to say was I noticed that on Leon's agenda, there was a note about how there weren't any submissions to Smart Scale last round for Caroline. We want to take care of that this time and make sure that there are some. So as you know, Smart Scale is a biennial program. Round 6 is starting basically now. So right now, as a county, you should start thinking about what your priorities are and what you would like to submit. In November, you're going to want to start submitting them into what they call a pre-scoping portal, which is basically you get a concept for your projects. You don't have to have your project ready yet, but you have to have an idea of what your project is. And this time around, GWRC is here to help you guys out with developing your projects and figuring out what a good project is and getting it all together. So a good application is something that follows along with what the state considers important. So it follows a VTrans need. VTrans is the state's long-range transportation plan, and we can help you guys determine that. We have allocated staff time, so we're here for that. You're going to need to take basically the winter to continue to develop your pre-application. Your pre-applications are due March 31st, and your full application is due at the end of July. Now, Ian did allude to a lot of changes that are coming down the pipeline, but we don't know exactly what's going to go through yet. In July, the Commonwealth Transportation Board had a meeting, and there were several proposals for sweeping changes, but we don't know which ones are going to stick yet. So right now, our advice is to choose your county's true priorities, focus on those, and start developing those as an application. Do you have any other questions for me on that?
Can I just,
Mr. Black? You got a question?
it's not a question, it's a statement. And it's something that I think we should be embarrassed about. Because if you look here at the SMART scale, from round one, which started in the summer of 2000, I guess, 15, application deadline, there have been 139 project applications to SMART scale in the 5 jurisdictions. We have put in 7. I would hope that we have, and I would imagine that we have more than 7 transportation needs in this county that need to be funded. We've had 2 major ones that have been funded. The Ladysmith Road project was the first one, and then the one in Charlesburg has also been funded. And that was when, before Kyle, Sean Nelson like literally sat down with us and helped us. I mean, VDOT basically came in, helped us design it, and we finished first. Like, we were one of the top projects in the state on that one back in, I think that was 2017. So we've had 7. So if you do the math on that, I'm not really good at it, but it's like 5%. So,
I will tell you.
oh, well, okay, we got it, but I'm saying we have 7 applications.
Right.
And I know we've gotten another one, but I'm saying we've had 7 total applications, and I think we've gotten 3.
That brings me
And-
to another point I forgot to mention. There has been some fear in Caroline County that we shouldn't put in an application because we have no leverage funding.
Yeah.
It's not necessary. If your application is very strong, if you have a good project, you don't need leverage funding. A good project can get funded.
But we did put in on 207, the project to change the signalization so that we could bring traffic on and off of 95 differently. And I think it came out to $11 million, basically, is what that whole project was going to cost, which we thought was a huge safety issue that didn't even rank. And so when you think of the 639 road project, we put in $6 million. We saved for 4 years to do that.
And
So the problem is that when you put these projects in and you get them, or the one we didn't get, the one at Carmel Church never made sense to me, is a huge safety issue. We have all kinds of traffic issues out there, and it didn't even rank.
Right.
And it's still an issue, but the match for that, if we had to match $11 million, and let's say we had to match 10, 20%, so you're looking at 1.1 to $2.2 million. I mean, it's just not in the realm of what we can do right now with all the other things that we're trying to do. So the match is it is a big deal. And I've talked to other localities that have the same question. You know, Spotsylvania went to referendum for a $260 million transportation, loan. We're not able to do that. So you've got to pick them. But the ones that we've picked for safety that didn't rate just baffle me.
But we're not going to be able to put our head in the sand. The Ladysmith Road project, yes, it was $6 million, and we did have a hard time coming up with it, but it was a $27 million project, and we paid $6 million for it. I will take that match any day, because when that Ladysmith Road, and it is not the road to nowhere, when Ladysmith Road is finished between 95 and Route 1, it's going to be an economic engine for us. I don't think anyone disagrees that that's going to be, we get development going on both sides. We've already seen sheets come in. You got a Wawa coming, you got a Dunkin' Donuts coming. It's going to be an economic engine that will pay off for us. And so we've got to look at this thing. Yes, I understand that we have certain debt limits, but the other thing too on the SMART scale is, in talking to people who are in the know, is when you put a project in, you'll see Stafford and Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg projects in, and they put a project in knowing that it's not going to get funded. But it puts the project on the radar. So it says, hey, wait a second. This locality wants this. Now they're not going to get it in this round, but if they keep on putting it in, all of a sudden now you'll see a ranking of a project go up the list because the locality keeps on putting it in and putting it in and putting
That's
it in.
exactly what I was going to say.
But that was my question, Carrie, because I think that gets to the root of what they're both saying. I want to do the 639 bridge. Okay, that's the second bridge on Route 639 over 95. I think Kyle told me the last time it cost $25 million.
That is a large project.
That's the last
Actually,
time.
it's been
I'm not
30 and
holding,
40
I'm not
million,
holding him
actually.
to that number. But say it's 25 million. Then I've got to come up with 20%. Do I need to have that 5 million identified? Or do I just put the project in and say, I want this bridge?
So with
What's going to happen?
with larger projects, it is more difficult to get them funded without some kind of leverage funding. That is true. But
That is one of the reasons why these larger jurisdictions have these transportation authorities, because they use that money as their leverage. So they buy the pot. So
Yeah.
you've got to think through the options of where you can get match from. It's two things. On the one hand, the smaller projects, you can usually put them in without a big match.
Right.
The larger projects, you usually have to try and find a match.
Okay.
And I just think it's high time that this region at least had a discussion about how we can improve the rate of getting match to meet these projects.
Yeah.
Or we can just give up. And I don't think
agree.
we should give up. I think we should at least talk about what are the options for finding a match so that we can help you. We're trying the little money we just spoke about with VDOT to try and get you a little bit of match so we can do these safety projects. There may be other ways. We need to start these conversations and look to find that match so that we can help each other.
And then the other thing too is, as Ian had said, the growth is coming, whether we like it or not. I mean, 4% over the last couple of years, it's coming to us. And with the water park coming up on Route 1, it's in Spotsylvania. It's only Route 1 is only going to get to be a bigger mess. I mean, with the amount of people that are going to be showing up to the convention center there and the water park, when 95 becomes a mess, Route 1 is going to be an absolute disaster in Caroline. And well, it already, it already is. But
Going to be?
yeah.
So members of the board, that is the reason why we're here tonight. That is the very reason why we are having this conversation, so that we can start to look at and plan down the road. There are options for creating opportunities. And Mr. Seeley, it may take you 4 years to save the funds for the bigger projects. But one of the things that I would caution, and I've seen this in a number of jurisdictions, is not always looking for the grandiose project. There are a lot of smaller projects that we can do over a number of years that would return a great amount of benefit to our citizens. And sometimes we get tunnel vision looking at the grand project as the big prize, when oftentimes you don't have the necessary infrastructure in place to support the grand project. The beauty of the 639 project is, yes, going west, that 4-lane divided project will support a new bridge. But there are many other projects that can be done along the network that are smaller projects that if we put our heads together and start to think about incremental funding options and other options, that we can make a huge difference. And so the goal tonight is, that's exactly why we're here, is to start thinking about the future and let's getting off center and let's not be behind the 8 ball. I can tell you, I just came from a jurisdiction that's behind the 8 ball. The reason they had to go to a bond referendum was because they had waited and waited and waited and tried to do the big things and never focused on the incremental improvements along the network. So I just wanted to throw that out there, tailgating on what Ian said. And right now, Kyle and Michelle are going to come talk to us about some state funding options that are available.
We had one more question from Mrs. Long, but I do remember when nothing was on Route 3. Okay, yeah. I'm that old, but I do remember.
And I will tell you, I oftentimes hear comments when I ask for developers to put in sidewalks, and they say it's a sidewalk to nowhere, and where now there are pedestrians and there are connections and there are incremental improvements, and you have complete networks. But somebody had to be the first to do it. So it's planning, and we're not going to be in 10 years what we are. We're not going to be in 5 years what we are today. So that's the purpose of being here.
Yeah, Liam, before you go, can you send all of us, can you get the information on the Safe Street for All program that has the 80% funding, so we at least know what we could possibly look at?
Yes, ma'am.
Because that's a new one. And there was a change in the number of applications, or there was discussion for smart scale. Where did that end up?
It has not been decided yet. That's what Carrie was alluding to. The changes have not been determined yet.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and one, just to build on what Leon just said, I think we really want to focus on what the priorities are. And when you have priorities, you got a lot of different buckets of priorities. So Smart Scale, yes, there are parameters behind Smart Scale where you have to do work on a route that meets a VTrans need. So, just talking with Stephen, like those are your Route 1s, your 207, your 301, your primary routes through Caroline County. But the reality is, like right now on Route 1, you don't have a shelf-ready project. That's what we're trying to change. I think that's what Leon's trying to change. I know our planning team right here, they're the ones working with their consultant to get that Route 1 study done, to have some additional projects for, the next round of Smart Scale. Mr. Black, to your point, if you have projects that will improve the throughput on Route 1 or make it safer or what have you, we want to get you those shelf-ready projects so that you are ready to apply when November comes around for that.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Long.
Why don't you realign Page Road intersection for me?
This is one of the things that we're going to be looking at.
But you're doing a safety study now. Do we have to wait for that study to come down on where the needs are done? Is that going to be a put off because you're doing some kind of a pipeline study on Route 1, correct?
Yeah, that's which Page Road and that intersection on Route 1 is included. And depending on what comes back from that study, you may have a shelf-ready project to apply for round 6 of Smart Scale.
So we're not held up on anything on 301 on Route 1 waiting for this study to be completed.
Well, the study is going to be complete before the next round of Smart Scale for you to apply. That's the goal.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But Page Road wouldn't be a Smart Scale project, would it?
Page Road itself wouldn't be, but we're talking about the intersection on Route 1.
But I'm just trying to connect on discussions you and I've had to share with the rest of the board. Page Road wouldn't be Smart Scale. Neither would Dry Bridge Road.
Correct.
Be a good candidate for Smart Scale. So
correct. But
we have some other roads that need other things like revenue sharing, like Ian said, finding buckets of money.
Yep. Let me do some tap dancing up here because I'm hoping I can answer a lot of those questions.
Well, I don't care if you tap dance. I just want to see money come out. If money comes out, you can tap dance all you want.
Well, that might be what happens.
Go right ahead then.
All right. So,
I'm sorry, Mr. Underwood had a question.
So what determines whether, you have residential, you have agricultural needs on the roads as well as business needs. So what determines the priority in terms of Smart Scale based on, I have roads that are definitely too narrow. So what determines if that, what would meet a Smart Scale project to fix, let's say, Route 652?
Sure. So Stephen, our district planner here, can talk about the VTrans needs and kind of what that application process looks like if you're going through Smart Scale, and really how a road qualifies. That's your question, Mr. Underwood?
Yeah, basically, because I have several needs in Carmel Church with the amount of traffic there for the development that's taking place there, and a 2-lane road just is not sufficient.
Right. And it's not going to meet a VTrans need whatsoever, but we're going to talk about some other things that will. But first, I want to talk about the VTrans need, and then we're going to talk about all the different types of sources. So, Stephen.
With regard to secondary system and Smart Scale, we have had projects, as you know, you mentioned the one at 639 Charlesburg. So if there's a safety need, a VTrans safety need that's currently identified, we can pursue that. We can work with Mr. Hughes on those. For those areas that are not, it is less likely that Smart Scale will be funded or could be funded through Smart Scale, but we also could establish a need by doing certain types of safety studies ourselves, which would take the place of the need for the V-Trans needs. There are a number of ways you can do it, but most of the V-Trans needs are because they're the only ones that can possibly apply on those secondary roads are the safety needs, not the corridors of statewide significance, not the regional network, not the UDA needs, those types of needs. Yes.
And your safety need, Stephen, question for the good of the group, safety need is based off of your data.
Mm-hmm. Crash history.
Crash data, things like that. Which there are a lot of locations out there that do currently have that data. Right. It's not to say that you can't find an area that you identify a need just because the data isn't there, but it just might not qualify for that V-Trans need. That's where we have to start thinking of other ways to fund it. So if I may, we're going to talk about a lot of different
Ian,
funding sources.
Did you have funding that you could identify for us?
What this man said is absolutely perfect. You've got to identify your priorities, and then we will help you point you towards which funding stream can work on that particular issue. They don't all cover all things. So Smart Scale requires you to meet a V-Trans need that V-Trans decides, or that the OIP decides, VDOT decides. But the Safe Streets for All program, you don't have to meet any V-Trans needs. You just got to demonstrate a specific safety need, and we've got ways of identifying those needs. It's a different program. So you've got, when you have your priorities, then you call us and we'll say, okay, we'll help you find which bucket it fits with.
But that doesn't help me with Ladysmith Road and the speed study.
The first thing that I'll talk about is the secondary 6-year plan. You all see me here every year. We talk about the secondary 6-year plan. It is exactly that. It has to be on a secondary road, or it has to service a secondary road. So what the secondary 6-year plan funds are telefees. These are funds that VDOT recoups from telecommunications, utility programs, right? We get that money back from these people that have their items within our right of way, right? So we get these telefees at a statewide level. It's distributed throughout the state based off of, I want to say, lane miles and population. Caroline County gets around $86,000 a year, which doesn't seem like a lot, but you add that up over a 6-year span, I mean, you've got a very meaningful project. And that's just, again, you can couple a lot of these funding sources together. It doesn't have to just be secondary 6-year plan funds, right? So if you're like, well, okay, I have $86,000 identified in this, fiscal year 26 that I want to build a turn lane to this convenience site. Well, if that's not enough to do it, maybe you apply for revenue sharing. Maybe you add some local funds. I mean, we can mix and match these things to get what the needs are. But the problem we have, us collectively, is we don't always have on paper and know what those needs are. So he's going to talk a little bit more about that later. I want to dive into some of the things that we could look at with secondary 6-year plan. As we're developing this plan, I want to encourage you all to take a look in your individual areas and look at your rural roads, okay? Which Caroline has a lot of them, right? I drive them all the time. I grew up in Beaver Dam, right around the corner, okay? We have a lot of rural roads in the area. Where do you all consider the biggest needs? And you can define those needs based off of whatever you want. Maybe it's your truck traffic. Maybe it's the amount of complaints you get. Maybe it's the maintenance headaches that you get because the shoulder continues to rut out on 639. I mean, it can be whatever the need is in your area. You all get to dictate that, right? So one of the programs that I've done, I know I've talked about this before, but this has been very, very successful. It's a small amount of money comparatively when you talk about these large projects, and the people that drive along these rural roads feel it and they see it, and it is in them as they drive down the roads to and from work. We're doing this, Ian mentioned it earlier, the shoulder hardening program that we've done in Stafford, Spotsylvania, Powhatan. I think I did it in Chesterfield. What we do is we work with the locality to identify priority routes for you all. Now, these are routes where You're driving down the road and you're like, wow, this route doesn't have a shoulder. Goes, you have a grass strip, and then there's a ditch, and then there's a whole bunch of nothing, right? You have a very narrow road. Maybe you have twists and turns, what have you, and you say, wouldn't it be nice if there was an edge line here, right? So we can take a look at those routes that you all prioritize. And what I've done, two different ways we can slice this. We can do it with our resurfacing schedule, or we can do it outside of the resurfacing schedule. If you decide to do it with the resurfacing schedule, I'm going to do the overlay of the road no matter what, because it's a priority for VDOT, and I'm maintaining that road, and I'm going to overlay it, just like that list of routes that I talked about earlier, and I just named half of them, right? We're going to be resurfacing all throughout the county. If you all identify those early enough, and we can talk about funding, it can be through secondary 6-year plan, it can be local funds. I can go out, I can identify if that road can be widened, right? Harden the shoulder. I take what is a gravel shoulder now, 1 to 2 feet on each side of the road, and I put an asphalt wedge. 1 to 2 feet of asphalt on either side of a narrow road goes a long ways.
So Kyle, let me stop you for a second. Let me just give you a road. Let's take Sparta Road, for example, because it's similar to a lot of roads that we all have, and it's got probably the highest volume of traffic, at least in my district. For Reggie, maybe something else. Nancy, probably 17, is looking for something like that. For Jeff or Clay, I'm not sure which roads because there's a number, but look, take Sparta Road. You and I have driven that many times.
Yep.
So is that a possibility? I mean, when you look at that, there are places where you're like, ooh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, look, I want to do a thorough review on all of these routes to make sure. But I have done, I can name 6 off the top of my head where I've done, if you've been down to Powhatan, Route 711, Huguenot Trail, I did parts of that in Powhatan. Up in Stafford, we've done Mountain View, and I think a section of Andrew Chapel, and a section of Poplar. I mean, it's just, the list goes on. Like we've done this. It's proven to be effective, and the answer is yes. As long as it doesn't go immediately into a ditch, I have to stay within the 30 feet of right of way, but I may have a foot or two to play with on each side, and that goes a long ways. It goes a long ways, and the people that drive these routes, they will feel that.
And he's already, if I can attest, he's already helped me on Ladysmith Road near Bridlewood, because
and this is so much better than that.
but even though, like, just shaving off some of the and adding some to the because it was very, very narrow, and right, there's absolutely no shoulder, and he actually helped widen.
We did that by hand with asphalt. This would go down with a piece of equipment. It would be a paver.
Yep.
And then I come in afterwards, if you do it with my resurfacing schedule, and I overlay on top of it with surface treatment, Cape Seal, maybe depending on what the treatment is on the road, and it's seamless. And it might be wide enough, depending on how much we can get, to even get edge lines in there.
So just out of curiosity, so like, for example, whatever road, like Jeff was saying Sparta Road, but if I said Ladysmith Road, between Lake Landor and say where the store is, where you had the intersection there, you could go through and identify this section needs it. So it wouldn't be the whole road. It'd be like, hey, this section really needs it. You would do sections.
I would do wholesale.
Wow.
Yes. And it would be, but the money's got to be there. And that's where you all have to identify those needs. Okay. There's no identified funding for this right now. But what a lot of the other localities have done is once they identify those needs, they start working towards that. Until you all identify the needs, I just come up here every year and talk about the routes that I'm resurfacing. But I'm meeting with some of my other localities right now, talking about my 2025 schedule and routes that they want to widen in 2025. I can do that same thing with Mr. Hughes right here, but he's got to have a list of routes from you all. You just named a bunch of them. And we can talk about that. We can start the review process, say, yes, it can be done. No, this one can't be done. Maybe you want to move this one up because it's on the resurfacing schedule, and you want to do that in tandem. We have options to play with, but we have to identify those needs first. So I say that is one thing you can use secondary 6-year plan for. Now, that wouldn't work on say 17, because that's not a secondary road. But if you all want to use local funds, there's options there. I'll tell you that that's what Spotsylvania is doing right now. They're giving the department $1.5 million right now just for what I just talked about, on identified needs and priorities from the county. Not VDOT priorities necessarily, but maybe because of a development that's coming in, whatever the answers may be. And they are putting that money forward to get that done. Again, I'm not saying you have to throw $1.5 million at it. You could get a lot done.
Is that revenue sharing?
That is their local funds.
But so they're giving you their money,
and then I'm administering
and you're doing
the
their
work,
project,
and then I'm resurfacing routes. I'm doing that with my cost.
But revenue sharing is like 50-50 match.
Correct.
Okay.
Michelle's going to talk a little bit about revenue sharing next. So, but look, I just wanted to touch on secondary 6-year plan. I'm starting with the small fish, okay? Because I hear everything about smart scale and it has to meet a V-Trans need. And I know I could probably name a road in every single one of your areas that you're like, but it doesn't have a V-Trans need, but it's a need, right? I get it. I understand it. I drive these roads myself. But that doesn't mean, just because it doesn't meet a V-Trans need and it might not fit into smart scale, that something can't be done that is meaningful to the people that drive on those roads. And that's where we can work together. Mr. Hughes here is going to bring it home at the end. I know he is, because he's told me. And we're going to talk about putting that plan together. But the plan is going to be, yes, for the small fish, the ones that I just talked about through the secondary 6-year plan, local funds, however you want to do the rural roads. And then we're going to talk something about as big as the bridge over 95 on 639. So anyways, there's my spiel, my sales pitch on secondary roads, rural roads. I know that is important to you all. It's important to us. I have to maintain the shoulders. So anything I can do to make that easier, absolutely. So I'm going to pass it over to Michelle to start talking about some smart scale things, and we'll go from there.
All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
I think most of what I was going to say has maybe been touched on just a little bit by everybody else. So I'll be very, very quick. Smart scale, I think we've kind of covered. That's our big umbrella program. Again, have to be on a corridor of statewide significance, regional network, UDA, or it has to meet a V-Trans safety need. There are a few other little opportunities for projects, probably on your secondary system, or even on the primary system, if you have a very pressing safety need, and that comes from a VDOT pot of money. It's HSIP, that's some Highway Safety Improvement Program funds. And our traffic engineering folks and our operation folks, even working with Kyle or my group in the project development team, we look at those roads ourselves to identify top accident locations in and around the district. But if you really feel that you have one of those intersections, we can work with you on that too. To use those highway safety improvement funds, you have to meet a cost-benefit ratio and a few other criteria, but that is a pot of money that can be used if there is, a high accident history, if there have been fatalities at an intersection or on a stretch of road. So that is another pot of money that is available for some safety-related fixes on the road, whether they're spot improvements or systemic. So by systemic, I mean like where we put in rumble strips either on the edge line or on the outside shoulders. That's a good example of that. Some of the other programs, just to kind of give you a flavor, revenue sharing, we kind of talked about that just a little bit. The Ladysmith project that's under construction right now, that is revenue sharing and smart scale. So that was a good example of how you can kind of mix and match some of the funding programs at VDOT. Revenue sharing or state funds, it is a 50% match, but you can do a lot of things with that program if you wish. There is the TAP program, Transportation Alternatives. Those are bike and pedestrian improvement type projects. I know that was something that was kind of mentioned earlier in Mr. Hughes' presentation about some connectivity issues in and about the county or some needs thereof. We're in the current TAP and revenue sharing cycle right now, but you already had to put in your pre-application if you were interested in one of those projects. Those are every other year, off years from the smart scale cycle. This year's guidance that just came out put a $2.5 million cap on TAP projects moving forward. So that would be a lifetime on those projects, $2.5 million. And those are federal funds, 20% locality match. I know sometimes when you get a TAP project, some of those federal requirements seem kind of onerous for some localities when we have to mention all of those. But again, that is a federal program. And then last but not least, just to mention, and this is a VDOT program, and this is how we take care of our bridges and pavements, and that's the state of good repair. That is how a number of the bridges that Kyle mentioned earlier that are under construction right now, how we are funding those. I know the 639 bridge has come up a number of times, rather that one is eligible right now for SGR funds. I guess good for us, maybe not good for what you want to hear tonight, but good for us. That one is not on our list right now. It's not in a state where its general condition rating is not to a point where we would be able to use state of good repair funds for that bridge.
We're looking for a second one, not that one. We're looking for, not to repair that one. We're looking for a second one, another 2 lanes across 95.
Correct. And SGR funding is not for capacity improvements.
Okay.
You can only repair the bridge that's there, so to speak.
Okay.
And some of the other bridges, I know this has come up in the past, so we'll just be transparent about that. Some of the other bridges that we have replaced over I-95 have partial funding from state of good repair, but then the remaining funding to widen them has come from other funding sources. So that is a high level of just kind of our funding salad, so to speak, at VDOT. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Question for Michelle.
When you put in a smart scale project, is it still to the point where, I know last year they were going for, if you have they want you to have sidewalks or something to go along, does that make it score? Was not part of the scoring process. If you had like sidewalks or something to go along with it, it would a
That
project.
is some of the criteria right now that is under consideration by the CTV.
But right now it does scare the project.
There are some criteria in the scoring mix that you can get some points in different categories, depending on the features of your project. But again, if you, and we won't get into all the nuances, but there are some things that are being considered to change some of the smart scale scoring criteria for some of those projects by the CTV right now, and they're slated to act on those by the end of this year.
One of the things, do you know, because I left the meeting after it was the summer, but I think it was a CMPT meeting up in Fredericksburg. Was that the one at Nats Park?
CTB was met
at
here
Nats Park,
in,
yes.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that at that meeting that was kind of very interesting to me was that VDOT did a study on if there was any sort of, I guess, discrepancy in smart scale funding between rural localities and your more bigger jurisdictions. Do you remember when that was up there? They did some sort of study, and VDOT did the study on its own. So you guys did a study on whether your funding, your own study on whether your funding was fair or unfair. And you came out that it was perfectly fair. So you did your own study, which was kind of hard to take. You know, I mean, you would think that someone from the outside would do that. But one of the points that was disturbing on the smart scale, and Mr. Seeley hit it on it too, is on the Ladysmith Road project. Yeah, we have to do projects. I understand that. But on the Ladysmith Road project, we put in $6 million, and the state put in, 21, which is great. But like for jurisdictions that are even smaller than ours, that have a major highway going through, if a jurisdiction can't afford that and they have a major thing, that is a detriment. If we don't have the funding, that Spotsylvania has. We don't have the funding that a Stafford has, that a Prince William has. And so you really can't convince me that that is fair to and I don't know if we have to go above you for this, and I know Mr. Hughes is saying, well, there are certain small projects. Yes, well, there's going to be great small projects that we can do. But we're staring at that bridge over 95. The traffic is only going to continue to get worse. That bridge over 95, we can't ignore it. It's going to have to be done. And like when we're looking at having to pay $10 million, $12 million, a Stafford, a Prince William, pretty easy for them to come up with that because that bridge cost is probably not much more expensive up there than it is down here. Or maybe it is, but for us, that is just such a huge cost in comparison. So I don't know who we would talk to about that funding, but when you start talking about large projects and you say we have to put in more, it is very difficult sometimes for smaller jurisdictions like King George and Caroline to be able to come up with that money that the Staffords can.
No, I understand. The study that's going on first, to address the first part of that, VDOT is doing some review as part of the review of Smart Scale, but there are also some consultant teams that are working on that. So we're not totally guarding our own hen house a little bit. Second part of that about the money, I hear what you're saying. There are also some projects around the state and in our district that have been funded, though, by smaller localities that are on the larger order of magnitude. We had some passing lanes on Route 3 in Richmond County that were funded a few years ago. They were $13 or $14 million, if I recall, and they had zero leverage funds. So it's not necessarily all or nothing. Sometimes funding.
So you're telling us to put the bridge in as safety?
There's a number of things that would be required before you could put the bridge in as far as a Smart Scale project. So we'll talk to you about that. Mr. Hughes, we've talked to him about that, about how you get ready to put that kind of project in. But again, anybody can submit projects that meet the correct criteria for Smart Scale.
Ms. Thomas?
Go right ahead.
I'll use the Spotsylvania, the Massaponax exit as example, but the capacity when it backs up on the 95. I've seen it hundreds of times. And it's been like that for years. That's a safety issue. And every sense of the word, it's a traffic congestion issue because it takes a lane away. And then all those people jutting over when they realize that, oh, my right lane stopped. That backs up, that ripples effect all the way up into Stafford. And it's been like that for years. And that's just asphalt. And when I look at this and like it's going to get redone. The whole intersection is going to get redone in a couple of years, but that's 2 more years that turnoff lane of 95, which has been a disaster, that between 3 and 5. And it's not that big of a ticket item, but we're going to have the same issue coming, the exit capacity on 104 and 110. 104 is going to have 3 million square foot of warehousing space turned over in the next year, which is going to be a lot of trucks and a lot of what little bits there. Do we need to go ahead and submit that now to have that? Because it's going to be an issue. But is it going to take 17 years to get more asphalt on the 95 so it doesn't stop a lane?
So
what's that? Yeah, true. Yeah.
So one of the things, exit 126, that's more complicated than maybe it appears on the surface. And one of the things that has been done at that exit, and we have a number of projects that are in the works, some that are under construction right now, more that are in the pipeline. One of the first things to do, though, is to get a traffic study underway for what is planned there and the improvements that would be needed at the interchange. Some of those we start and then require federal highway approval, and that's one of the things we've talked about with Mr. Hughes, and that's one of the first steps that really need to happen at 639 in that bridge and the interchange area to make meaningful improvements there.
What about 104? Yeah. What about 104 Carmel Church? I mean, that's just horrendous as well. And like I said, we're going to put 3 million square feet of distribution space there with employees and,
That would be the same type of conversation about doing some sort of traffic analysis to get the ball rolling with the proposed development that's coming to that area to see what sort of improvements are warranted for the interchange.
Well, I'm saying because you got a rural road there. You have Ruther Glen Road and Carmel Church Loop, but then you go out to 207. So you got a mixture of issues there that the 207.
I'm back to the 207 Smart Scale project that we put in 3 or 4 years ago. that didn't make it, which is a safety, and it's just going to get exponentially worse. And we tried to be ahead of it and couldn't. So, I mean, we can keep I'm not opposed to keep putting it in.
Right.
But to what end? It's already done. You guys have the whole application. Do we just keep resubmitting it, or do we need another traffic study again? I mean, because nobody has said to us, do another traffic study and resubmit it. We submitted it, it didn't make it. You kind of go, okay, it didn't make it. Now what?
Well, Smart Scale, every round, projects are scored relative to the projects that are submitted that round statewide, if that makes sense. So just because you were graded against those projects in the round you submitted, and I can't remember if it was round 4 or 3.
Right, it was a round.
It was a round.
I see what you're saying.
It'll be a different set of projects the next round. Now, I would encourage you, if you have a different set of development, different things happening in that area, then yes, we should revisit the project. We should retweak the application, see if it's still valid. The improvements, are they still what is needed for the area? It's worth revisiting, not just to keep, kind of
Do
shoving
we
the same
need to
thing
come
in.
to VDOT and go, we need a study at the 104 north and southbound on and off ramp? Something new that's updated from where we were, because nobody has said to us collectively,
Right, do,
resubmit that, but here's what you need to do that.
or do different.
Or what we need to do
Okay,
different. And that
okay.
is, from me, the frustrating perspective of this is that for all of us, the 207 interchange affects everybody up here. I mean, everybody has residents that go through that interchange. So it's a collective, if we can fix it, let's do it.
So
But what do we
part
need
of
to
the
do?
conversation, and where I think this is good dialogue for tonight, that Mr. Hughes wanted us to start, is really for collectively is what is the priority for the county?
Yeah,
Is it the 104?
Yeah.
Is it the 110?
And I think
Where is it?
what we need to do is have another discussion like this, because you're giving us basically the foundations and the framework for how to make a decision. And we've got to actually make that decision.
I think there are a couple things. I'm sorry, Leon. I think there are a couple things. You've got to decide where you want it, and then you've got to figure out to get the studies to move forward at those areas that you have prioritized. It's step by step. But first, let's figure out where those areas are that collectively you want to prioritize, and what things do you want to prioritize at those areas. Because it could, you can't just say maybe one giant interchange project. Well, maybe it's you break it off here and you work on a section of 207 over here. Like, what are the priorities? Where are the issues? And that's where this guy gets to come in.
Mr. Chairman.
Can I ask a technical question on a traffic study? You say traffic study. We're trying to get ahead. These buildings are being built. So how do you do a traffic study? Because we know there are going to be trucks coming out of there.
Yeah, that's.
So one of the ways we can do it is when these projects come along and they start to submit site plans, is that we have a requirement that they do a traffic study. So I'll give you a prime example. There's a proposal for another 1 million square foot warehouse on Carmel Church Road. Well,
They ain't having it.
Sorry?
They ain't having it.
It's a by right use. So, but now
They don't have to do anything. They're coming.
now, but with that said, they have to go through the site plan process.
Right.
Okay. So the first thing they call us, well, what do I need to do? And I said, we need to do a traffic study, because we need to understand what the impact of your project is going to be. Because it's by right doesn't mean you don't get to do anything. And I think that's what has happened in the past is we've allowed developers and projects to come along without requiring them to do anything. And that's not the case. VDOT is not going to allow entrance permits on roads that are not safe because of new traffic. They don't want to allow projects that impact the signal at Carmel Church Loop and 207 because there's an additional 800 or 900 vehicle trips a day. It's incumbent upon those developers to provide those studies when they come along and do that, and then make their fair share contribution to making those improvements. So that's how you deal with the by right development. But when projects come along and have to go through an enabling process, then you make them responsible for doing it. It is development should pay for itself. It is not incumbent upon the county. Those companies are coming here seeking something. They want to be here. okay? They're in the business to make money. They have performed those improvements. And if we allow them to go along and not do their fair share, I'm not saying an individual project should have to do a complete redo of an interchange, but they need to contribute something to that. They make some impact to the network. And so that's part of this process. And that's what we're talking about tonight, which segues to kind of closing here is, you know, we as a jurisdiction, we have to do a couple of things. One, we've got to make some type of commitment to funding. That could be looking at our capital improvements plan and putting money in there every year to build up. You know, one of the things that Kyle talked about was the studies. Well, VDOT is not in the business of necessarily doing the studies. They're going to look to us to do studies. And so, you know, some of these studies cost $200,000 or $300,000. Well, if we had a commitment to funding through our CIP process of, I don't know, I'll say $50,000 a year. Okay, it may take us 3 or 4 years to pay for a study, but it gets a study paid for. And then you build on that, because once it gets into a study, now all of a sudden it starts to become eligible for some of these funding sources. And that's the base to move us to the next process. You talk about what you've done, that's exactly what Spotsylvania is doing. Things that are happening in Spotsylvania did not happen overnight, okay? It took them a long time to get to the point to where they are. They made a commitment.
They're behind the 8 ball.
Yes,
Well,
but
the good and the bad.
the good and the bad.
good and
But
the
they
bad,
made a
right.
commitment to set aside a certain amount of money every year, and they just banked it up. And then when they got enough money, they put it towards a project. The other thing that we should think about is identifying the process, developing a ranking system that actually ranks it, where, you know, one of the things we could do is set up a committee that sits down, that's comprised of board members, planning commission members, and if you want to add citizens to it, to sit down and identify the priorities. And those priorities are in different pots. It's not necessarily the bridge over 95 competing with the Sparta Road, but you put that bridge in a category by itself. Then you take your rural roads and you prioritize your needs in your rural roads, because like you all have issues in your rural roads, some are going to be worse than others. You identify the needs in those rural areas. And then you look at your growth area and you identify what the needs are in those growth areas. So you've got 3 sets of different priorities so you can attack the collective. But through all that is said, the most important thing is it's one project at a time. And when you get one set of funding, the one thing that I learned in Spotsy, if you get a little bit of money here, then you can start to parlay that money towards another pot of money and then another pot of money. And then that's how you ultimately build your projects.
Mrs.
Okay.
Mrs.
So
I was going to
Ms. Long.
address something. Yeah, Mrs. Long, I was going to address something that she had asked. At the meeting this summer, the Secretary of Transportation said that one of the problems that they'd had with smart scale projects is that a lot of these projects, they were building to the traffic that was at that time. So you're in Stafford. Stafford needs, I don't know, road widening. They needed it 5 years ago. So they build it to, 2022 standards, but then in 2024, it's already out of date. So what they're looking at is in the traffic studies is actually like the Youngkin administration wants to look down the road and say, we don't want to build the road where it's good for 2 years, where based on traffic information now, because we know there's going to be a bigger population moving in. So one of the things that they were talking about is changing smart scale or identifying as smart scale, actually moving ahead. Correct me if I'm wrong. Am I correct, right, on that? They were looking at.
Anytime we do a study, we do a growth factor. I mean, we're looking at the developments, we're looking at the future growth in the area. All that comes into play.
Yeah. They were talking about but he was talking about putting it as a huge, and I don't know if they're stealing your thunder or whatever, but that was something that he brought up at the meeting as a priority with that administration. So I think that's something that will be, when we do it, will need to be considered. And also, I think Mr. Thomas hit on it. We have failed in this as a board of supervisors. We have failed. We need, even if we don't have the funding, keep on putting his projects in every year. Mr. Parton, Mr. Cully, Mr. Hughes, we need to have meetings like this once or twice a year where we address what our traffic needs are, because it's coming. It's already in Route 1. It's coming throughout the whole county. And if we just put our head in the sand, we're going to be buried.
Well, the reality is what we're doing, kind of like what we've done for utilities, is our actions now should be for what's happening 5 years ahead. we have to some degree, be fortune tellers and say, we expect development here. We need to plan for road improvements, in that case. You said, but you were going to summarize, and I do appreciate all of these folks being here for this long. And thank you to VDOT and GWRC, and I'm still calling you Fred and VRE. So we want to thank you all for being here. But Mr. Hughes?
Yeah, I'll just summarize on and piggyback on something Mr. Black.
Well, we want to make sure we got money for number 4 while we got all these people here, so.
Yeah, but Mr. Black said something very important, and I'll piggyback. The studies, the idea that the governor had, that idea is currently in place. So the 527 process requires that projects that meet a certain threshold do a VDOT study. One of the things that I've been working on is establishing a threshold for traffic studies within the county so that if a project meets our threshold, they have to do the study. The goal of the 527 originally was that every study would piggyback on the prior study. So what you eventually end up with is a library of studies that identify the current project needs, plus what will happen when future projects come along.
Right.
And so if you don't have projects that meet the 527 threshold, we establish a threshold and it continues to build that library. So but the second thing he said was meet once or twice a year. Well, I would beg to differ that it needs to be more frequent than that.
Quarterly at least.
And well, that's why I said to create the transportation committee, because this is a revolving door. And these things operate on cycles, and you have to be prepared when the cycles roll around to act and be able to move forward. So that's one suggestion I would have. We don't have, cannot be done by a single individual. This is a collective effort. And so that's why I said the committee comes along. Having the board members a part of that creates buy-in and allows you all to communicate with each other so that when the committee recommends a project, it comes with an endorsement and we don't have to play the ping pong game. And I can tell you, the VDOT folks will tell you one of the biggest frustrations they had in my prior jurisdiction for many years was that you identify a project one year, and then in the next year, as a set of priorities, and then the next year, those priorities would change. And so you could never move the ball. And the way you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And that's what this is about, is doing it one bite at a time. And there's a systematic approach to doing this that is proven to work. And so that's what I would offer. I would encourage us to look at taking the next step and creating some committees so that we can collectively tackle this. We are ahead of the game at this point. We have an opportunity not to have citizens complain about new projects. So with that, I would personally like to thank everyone who came tonight from VDOT, from GWRC, from VRE, from FAMPO,
FBX Go is.
FBX Go, I'm sorry,
Right.
Fred. I keep wanting to say Fred. FBX Go. But I hope you all appreciate the amount of resources that are in this room tonight. We had the dream team of a regional body here tonight, and that cannot be understated. So I would just say thank you all for the opportunity to do this. And, I appreciate it very much. And I hope we can go forward and make our citizens proud.
Well, Mr. Hughes, we're going to say thank you to you because I think a lot of these folks came because you're the one that asked them and not necessarily because they were coming to see us. So we appreciate that. And again, we thank all the folks that came. Is this number 4A, is that Mr. Wilson or is that you? Because I want to know about Dry Bridge Road. We're not letting go of that bone for sure.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Good evening, sir.
To summarize, you have a resolution this evening seeking $150,000 to design repair for Dry Bridge Road that will allow MCD to function as they want to function. That will continue to allow them to expand. Since 2003, they've increased to 500,000 square feet, 500 technology and manufacturing jobs, and $86 million of investment. It's been a very successful company. We want to continue to facilitate them. They have 500 acres to expand on, and making the road work for them is imperative. Not only will you be getting $150,000, it also sets us up for construction money to follow that. There's a possible $700,000 grant that will be matched by a state of $150,000 if matched by another source, which we suggest MC Dean would probably be happy to do. I say that because we have been in discussions with them, and I think that's a number that they can tolerate. And it may set us up for additional cooperation based on some of the other agreements that we've had with them in the past. So we might be able to take a big chunk out of the problem on Dry Bridge Road by passing the resolution this evening. This is a little different from the resolution that you passed about a month ago. You probably remember that also had Ruther Glen Road attached to it. Two things have happened, well, a number of things have happened that changes the pace for seeking that money and taking it out of this. First of all, by separating the two grant applications, your match decreases from $50,000 to $1,500. So approximately a $50,000 savings for the board. Ruther Glen Road, however, we've been working with, again, this is all from the VDOT Economic Development Access Road Fund money. It's a major employment investment company that we've recruited on Ruther Glen Road currently, which may allow us to seek $500,000 unmatched for studying and designing repairs on Ruther Glen Road, with $1 million construction up front, and then $1 million match by the state if matched by an outside source, which could be a number of different ways to approach that. It has been mentioned that there's additional investment being sought in that area. It's another reason to delay slightly seeking that grant, so that we're actually studying the right thing and the right impacts, as opposed to just pushing ahead at the moment. So we're seeking real funding for real projects with real construction to follow. And that's made possible by your leadership this evening in passing the resolution.
We didn't give Mr. Hicks a chance to speak from MC Dean. Do you desire that?
No, I'm here to answer any questions you guys have. As Gary said, getting drivers sorted out, a lot of large vehicles, a lot of products. So, pictures earlier from VDOT.
Yes.
Where we, the trucks we have down get up to about 160 feet in length. So if you know those curves on that road, that's a very difficult proposition to go through. A lot of times we need to utilize police resources from the county. We need to utilize, stop traffic. And then there's obviously the safety issue with those roads as well. So we have an additional 500 employees coming in and out a day. And probably 10 large loads coming in, 10 large loads coming out a day. So it's a problem area.
It's a real safety issue, right?
It's a safety issue, an access issue.
Michelle?
Straightening it will
Safety.
provide a lot of better access to, the 500 acres of industrial land that can be utilized for future development outside of MCD.
Okay. All right, Mr. Hicks, appreciate it. And again, thank you, Mr. Underwood. You had a chance to read the motion.
Yes.
Any other board member not read it, or I think we all read it. Go ahead, Mr. Underwood.
I'd like to make a motion that the board accept the resolution request for economic development access funds.
Okay, we'll all second it. Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I'm sure Mr. Bates will be on that tomorrow, and we can get started. Again, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for coming. We do appreciate your time. You have one more? Oh, we need to close the planning commission? And you're the last one left? Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I would like to close the planning commission until tomorrow evening.
Okay. Do you need a second for me? Just kidding. All right. Thank you, sir. All right, this concludes our business for the evening. Again, thank you folks for being here. We appreciate your time and we will definitely be in touch. Have a good evening.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Bates,
Second.
don't run away.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Stand adjourned. Ian, is that a Joburg accent?
Yeah.
It is.